Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs, the Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center, and our co-sponsors, the Václav Havel Program for Human Rights and Democracy, and the Lee Kaplan School of Journalism and Media, I warmly welcome you to today's LAC Teach-In Venezuela in 2026, between the Restoration course and the Resource course. Welcome to everyone joining us here today in the Green School International Pavilion and to those following us via Zoom webinar. Today's event brings together distinguished scholars and experts to examine Venezuela's current political landscape and its broader international and economic implications. This teach-in is organized in 2 panel sessions with time allotted for audience questions. We will begin with welcoming remarks from Dr. Jose Miguel Cruz, Interim Director of the Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center. Dr. Cruz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Claudia. Good morning, everyone. Buenos días a todos, a todas. My name is Jose Miguel Cruz. I'm the Interim Director of the Kimberly Green Latin American Caribbean Center. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this first teaching event of 2016, Venezuela in 2026, between the Restoration course and the Resource course. The importance and timing of this conversation speak for themselves. So instead, I want to focus on our role as scholars who have studied Venezuela and sought to understand its complexities over the past 5 decades. From Venezuela, we have learned profound, sometimes hard lessons, right? That a country rich in natural resources but dependent on a single commodity can develop institutions vulnerable to long-term stability. We have also learned that the democratic regime weakened by chronic high-level corruption can collapse and give way to authoritarianism and dictatorship. We also have learned that crime and violence can be fostered or even perpetrated by parastate forces as mechanisms of control. Remember, the colectivos, for instance, right? But Venezuela, in reality, has also taught us more than its tragedies. It has also shown the importance of human rights and democracy. Despite its flaws, the Venezuelan democracy stood for years as a refuge, when many Latin Americans fled their own dictatorships in the 1970s and 1980s. Right? Venezuela was full of Central Americans, Argentinians, Chileans fleeing their own dictatorships. Venezuela has also demonstrated the power of a strong, engaged, and educated civil society, one that helped rebuild democracies across the region and inspire hope beyond its borders. And of course, it has gifted us, the world, with exceptional minds. Jacinto Convit, whose pioneer work on vaccines against leprosy advanced science. Baruch Benacerraf, a Nobel Prize winner. Arturo Pietri, who actually, a public intellectual who actually warned us about the perils of the resource course, right? We in the United States and the world have benefited immensely from Venezuelans. And as a university, as the Green School, and as LAC, we are called to contribute in return. Whatever the future holds for Venezuela, our work in academia can help support the reconstruction of a sovereign democracy grounded in rule of law and human dignity. It is my hope that the discussion sparked by this teaching will guide us in that endeavor. I want to thank our exceptional panelists, as well as the Václav Havel Program for Human Rights and Democracy and the Lee Kaplan School of Journalism and Media for supporting this event. And with that, it is my pleasure to turn the floor over to Professor Alejandro Alvarado of the Lee Kaplan School of Journalism and Media. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Cruz. So we will now begin panel 1, titled The Venezuelan Political Reality. The session will be moderated by Dr. Alejandro Alvarado Bremer, who is the director of the Spanish Language Journalism Master Program and is Associate Professor of Journalism and Communication at FIU. And we are joined by an outstanding group of panelists, Astrida Raraz, Julio César Camacho, Víctor Hugo Guerra, and Ofelia Riqueses Curiel. Thank you all for being here today. Alejandro, I will turn the program over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Happy to be here. Thank you to the Latin American and Caribbean Center, Kimberly Green, for organizing these events that we call the Tichin, which have become a signature of LAC, discussing the situation for regions. We started with Central America in November, and now we got the idea of organizing this event about Venezuela. Before everything happened, we were discussing about having something in Venezuela last year after the bombings started, the bombings of the boats that presumably carried drug dealers and drugs. And I was here actually at LAC, and I was discussing with Liesl, with Claudia, and with Jose Miguel potential scenarios for Maduro. We were already talking that Maduro might flee the country and into a safe haven, and that there were negotiations already in place. So we thought that when the arrests and extraction of Maduro, a lot of people and Venezuelans, particularly that live here in Miami, thought that it was the beginning of democracy. But Mr. Trump says, no so fast. No? So the Three Kings prize, El Regalo de los Reyes de Mr. Trump, came without the muñequito. La Rosca de Reyes came without the muñequito. And we thought that Maria Corina was going to become the new leader of Venezuela. And we found out that no, that there were already dealings with Delcy Rodríguez and the Rodríguez brothers, and also with Diosdado Cabello. I just named that name and I feel shivers. And so we started already the discussion about this. And what I would like to do now, I would let our excellent group of panelists to give their general impression, according to their specialty, of what's going on in Venezuela today. And then we will talk about scenarios, and then we'll talk about different questions that we have prepared and discussed in advance. So, Astrid.
Right. Is it working? Yes. Well, good morning. Thank you for being here on a Friday morning. And it's a pleasure to be here with in the company of a distinguished panelist. Thank you so much for the Latin American Caribbean Center, your Center Bacaver Center, for inviting us. Responding to your question, as you said, what has happened since Maduro has been captured? I would argue that the United States has prioritized on continuity and stability in Venezuela. Why do I say this? The situation in Venezuela is extremely complex. It's not a situation where a country can come, take a leader, and everything is going to change and democracy is going to come immediately. No, Venezuela is a complex context where you have an authoritarian regime that has been in place for more than 27 years with extreme repressive forces, absence of rule of law, an economic crisis, a crisis of legitimacy, an election that took place in 2024 where there was proof, there was evidence that there was fraud, We have human rights violations. We have the existence and the presence of armed groups from Colombia, armed groups from other countries, colectivos, which are paramilitary groups that are work closely to the government. And we have an opposition that is divided. And we have a country in crisis. So why is the U.S. choosing Delcy Rodríguez and not Maria Corina Machado or Edmundo Rodríguez, who is the winner of the 2024 elections? Because Delcy Rodríguez represents continuity and stability. She is a member of the authoritarian regime. She has occupied multiple very important positions in the government, ranging from Minister of Petroleum, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Director of the National Intelligence, and Vice President. Keeping Delcy Rodríguez in power as a leader also provides some degree of legitimacy if you follow the 1999 Constitution, where the VP will be the successor of the president, who's not there anymore. We have found out through the media that it seems that Delcy Rodríguez was talking to the Trump administration in Qatar, in other places, while they were discussing what would happen if Maduro steps down, if Maduro is no longer in power. So she was part of those conversations, and I'm positive that in those conversations, the Trump administration received some positive feedback that she was willing to collaborate in the absence of Maduro. And there were also sources that claim that Diosdado Cabello, who is the Minister of Interior, also participated in these talks. So most likely, behind the scenes, there were conversations of different key actors in the authoritarian regime of Maduro, Diosdado Cabello, Padrino Lopez, who's the Minister of Defense, and Delcy Rodríguez, that they were discussing that probably they will work together in case that Maduro was no longer in power. Maria Corina Machado, who is the leader, the most vocal leader of the opposition, although Edmundo González was the one who was elected in the 2024 elections, it's important to clarify it. According to the Trump administration, and these are Trump's remarks, not mine, she is not respected. That's the first thing he said. But what he meant is that it's not that she's not respected, it's that she's not supported. She won't receive the support of key actors, such as the armed forces, the police, the colectivos, other actors who are coexisting in Venezuela within this authoritarian regime. So Maria Corina Machado is not the choice if you want continuity and stability. And why does the U.S. want continuity and stability? Because the priority is oil control, oil production, oil sales, a country who will collaborate with drug trafficking, a country or a leader who will collaborate with receiving deportees, and maybe some degree of a transition to something that could be a democracy or not. But if we follow what Marco Rubio said, according to the plan that they have for Venezuela, there are 3 stages. One is stability, so stability is the priority. Number 2, recovery, and all those points are related to the oil production, the oil industry, the release of some political prisoners, of course, in recovery. And 3rd, transition. And when they asked Marco Rubio, what about the transition? There were no answers, because probably that's not the priority. The priority is stability. So that's where we are now, and I'm going to leave my fellow panelists
to Victor.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. I fully agree with you 100%. Thank you very much, Professor Cruz, for the invitation. Thank you very much, Alejandro, for the coordination of the panel. And welcome to this morning conference or event. It's such a nice space where I can see faces that I had over 20 years without seeing, and friends, colleagues, etc. So my impression, I will say, that Venezuela didn't enter into the 21st century. Venezuela is still living in the former century. We never enter in the 21st century. This is my first kind of impression. The second one is if I connect what happened with Maduro with a concept that we use in criminal economies, international criminal economies, we talk about adaptive complex systems. We don't talk any longer about cartels. We might refer to cartel because of the news and the title, etc. But actually, the scheme is an adaptive complex system. What that means if you take Maduro out of the criminal system, of the ecosystem, you will have other actors, players that will maintain the system moving. And this is not a scholar opinion. It's already covered by the executive order of President Trump of January 2025. If we go to that executive order designating foreign terrorist organization or foreign organization as a terrorist, the famous FTOs, well, we will have that wording there. And what that means, that they need somehow to coordinate the actions to maintain certain form of the economical ecosystem. So that is, in my view, what is happening in Venezuela. I agree fully with Andrea. They don't want to repeat what happened with when Hugo Chavez went out of the power and we have Pedro Carmona, and Pedro Carmona took the power of Venezuela for only 24 hours. So they don't want to repeat the story of Pedro Carmona, what happened with Hugo Chavez. So that's the reason why, in my view, somehow they are negotiating not only with Delcy, they are negotiating with the Rodríguez, one of the head of many other clans that will be in Venezuela.
Very good, very good. Now, to provide us the human rights perspective, we have Ofelia.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation, and especially Jose Miguel Cruz for that beautiful introduction that highlighted what Venezuela has to offer, the lessons that Venezuela has to offer that are not necessarily related to its tragedy. I thought that was very important. Thank you for that. Well, from the human rights perspective, I think it's also important to highlight that continuity. I know the news has been flooded lately with stories about how political prisoners are starting to be released. So people might tend to think that there is a liberalization of the Maduro regime, well, now the Rodríguez regime, or that the human rights situation is somehow changing. It's too early to tell how that will evolve. Currently, there is no transition in Venezuela, and I think that must be underscored. We are just seeing the face of the regime changing, but the system very much remains. And the human rights situation in Venezuela, of course, has been dire for many years now under the Maduro regime. We have witnessed a complex humanitarian crisis that was formally declared in the year of 2016 with hyperinflation, shortages of basic goods such as foods and medicines, maternal mortality rates, infant mortality rates skyrocketing, the collapse of public services, not only water and electricity, but also health and education. So socioeconomic rights have, of course, been violated by the Maduro regime for quite a few years now. That crisis, the contraction of the GDP by 75% between the years of 2013 and 2021, which is one of the largest contractions in peacetime that has ever been recorded. Of course, a result of disastrous economic policies introduced not only by Maduro, but also by Chavez, who was, the founder of this political project that turned into a closed system of power and that brought economic ruin, but also institutional collapse to the country. That for the part about socioeconomic rights. And we also need to mention the widespread human rights abuses that have been widely documented by international organizations, including the United Nations International Independent Fact-Finding Mission on the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, which has found that the patterns of violations of human rights, including arbitrary detentions, enforced disappearances, extrajudicial killings, and torture and other cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatments, amount to crimes against humanity. And crimes against humanity under international law are a very important concept because they point to a widespread and systematic attack against the civilian population. So it's not about isolated events or about state agents acting rogue. On the contrary, it's a state policy designed to quash opposition and promote silence. And so that situation, that human rights crisis really continues up until today. And that news of the release of these political prisoners must be, taken with a grain of salt. The number of political prisoners that have been released since January 8th, when Jorge Rodríguez announced that an important number of them would be released, has been a little over 150 of them. We still have over 777 confirmed political prisoners behind bars. There are other hundreds of them whose whereabouts are unknown, which puts them in a situation of enforced disappearance. And since January 3rd, other families have come forward denouncing that their loved ones have been also arbitrarily detained and they had not denounced the situation before out of fear of reprisal. So the number keeps growing. After January 3rd, the Rodríguez regime enacted a degree of external commotion under which Article 5 allows state security forces to detain people who celebrate the results of the American operation on January 3rd. So there has been a crackdown on journalists, especially after the military operation. There have been new detainees, which is part of a phenomenon that we refer to as a revolving door. Some prisoners are released and others are detained. So I think it's quite important to highlight that continuity and say that as long as there is no democratic transition, the human rights crisis will continue.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Julio César.
Well, first of all, my apologies for being so late and make you wait longer. And my hero is here because not only he was able to bring me here, but to pay my parking. What a shame.
No.
Alejandro, and thank you to the Center for Latin American Caribbean Center of FIU. I was telling Alejandro that I got lost in a university that I saw when it was founded. And I met the first president of the university, and 2 of my kids graduated from here. So I'm happy to be here, especially at this moment, because, it's an emotion that I got when I go back to a place that means a lot to me. Well, that's right.
Thank you.
Well, there is plenty to say, but let me see if I can go to the main thing for me today. I don't know if you remember that today in Venezuela, we are celebrating the dictatorship fall of Marcos Pérez Jiménez. A day like today in Venezuela, we say we got freedom, we got democracy. For how long? Well, for how long we got it already. And not only that, today I was in the radio mentioning something that happened in Venezuela with the government that Mr. Trump decided to put in. And I agree with Ophelia. I don't know, it's too early to predict what might happen in the future, in the near future, especially when we don't know what Mr. Trump has in his mind. One day things will something and the next day another one. So first of all, to let these people be in charge of the country, a criminal like Diosdado Cabello and defense minister like Vladimir Padrino, and even Delcy and her brother, who have been committing a lot of atrocities in Venezuela. So we don't know what to expect. Venezuela is in shambles now. Not only the economy, the criminality is so high in Venezuela that people are afraid to go out, even though they think that Trump was doing the right thing. Well, the thing is, doing the right thing doesn't mean that the country has to be run by criminals. And not only that, it's giving permission to exploit, petroleum and whatever. But the thing is, at this moment, I don't know what to do because, as I told you before, the lady who was in charge of the Venezuelan consulate in Miami in 2014, right, was expelled from the United States and accused of being a spy, right? And now, you know what? She's, what is his position now? She's in charge of the diplomat service that protects all the diplomats in Venezuela. She was designated like that yesterday. So now we know how things are going, and Mr. Trump apparently doesn't know what's going on. Anyhow, it's very difficult. To be honest with you, first of all, the government in Venezuela was not legit under Maduro, because he didn't win the election. He stole the election in 2024. So to say that Delcy is constitutionally speaking right in place because she was the vice president of what? They stole the election. But if Mr. Trump thinks that that's legal and we deserve that, what to do? Well, he got the power. So we don't know what's going to happen. And I agree again with Ophelia that it's too early to say what happened, because one day Mr. Trump says something and the next day says something. And I say Mr. Trump because he's not the government, because he controls everything in this country and out of this country. We are expecting, the beach and the hotels and the resort that they're going to have in Gaza, something that somebody else might say is absurd to think of something like that at this moment. But at this moment, Venezuelans are just waiting to see what's going to happen, because gangs, the economy, and external debt, whatever is happening there, we don't know how long it's going to last. They said yesterday, well, we start to sell oil and we got the money. Who's got the money? Of course, Chevron and all of that, but that money is not going to go to Venezuela yet. And it's plenty of money that Venezuela needs now to start to recover. We don't know how long it's going to last, this situation. So,
very good.
As I said before, we don't know what's going to happen. Let's wait to see what's going to happen in the near future.
And with that in mind, precisely, we, as political scientists, we want to think of potential scenarios. So, Astrid. And that's the difficult part, by the way.
Yes. So we were talking before yesterday, we were talking about what could be some potential scenarios. And I came up with 3. Of course, there can be more than 3. And we're just predicting. And how are we predicting? Because we have seen other transitions or lack of transitions in different countries. So I'm going to give you one. One scenario could be the authoritarian regime is going to readapt, reaccommodate, and there's not going to be regime change, meaning there's not going to be a transition to democracy. How can this happen? Delcy stays in power. Delcy plays ball. Delcy is going to obey to all the instructions that she can from President Trump and Marco Rubio. And they will make an arrangement that you take the oil, we take the deportees, we're going to collaborate with drug trafficking, and you keep us in place. And the authoritarian regime prevails and survives. That could be a scenario. It could be. The second scenario could be a transition to democracy. There will be Delcy Rodríguez stays in power. There will be pressures and demands from the Trump administration for her to conduct some changes. There has to be the presence of the Venezuelan opposition in this transition, in these talks, preliminary talks, conversations, negotiations. They have to come up with an agenda, points of the agenda. They have to come up with a timeline, and they have to come up with a plan on how to change the institutions of this country. Because without institutional reforms, release of political prisoners, establishment of rule of law, accountability, all these mechanisms, there's no way there can be a transition to anything that could be related to democracy. That is going to be a very prolonged, turbulent ride. It's going to take more than 1 year, 2 years. These conversations have challenges, opportunities. We have seen them in different countries. And I know many Venezuelans feel, oh, we want it now, we want it now, we want it now, we want change now. That's not going to happen. If it happens, it's going to be a long process. So that could be a transition, and we will see if Delcy Rodríguez and her alliance is willing to accompany this transition. Also, a transition to democracy needs international actors that are going to accompany and support. It could be regional countries out of the region, but the US should accompany in different ways this potential transition to democracy. So it could happen. And the third would be chaos and instability. Delcy Rodríguez cannot sustain the alliance. She will start obeying the Trump administration to implement some changes that the alliance won't support. And maybe there will be someone who will organize a coup to overthrow Delcy. Maybe it could happen, and she will lose control of the country. I don't know if the United States is willing to send troops to the ground to stabilize the situation. And maybe it's another authoritarian leader who will come to replace Delcy Rodríguez. So that could be like the worst case scenario: chaos, instability, and maybe another authoritarian leader.
Very good.
Yeah.
Together, a kind of a presentation. I don't know if how this will work, or maybe yes, or maybe not.
Yeah.
Alejandro, fantastic. Alejandro put together kind of 3 different questions for the legal side, and I should say first that when you have 2 lawyers in a room, you will not have a single opinion. You might have, more than 3, 4, 5, 6, you name it. So law, we cannot forget about that. It's a social science, and therefore will need interpretation, will need adaptation, etc. I need to say something, a disclaimer. I'm an international lawyer authorized to practice law in Venezuela and Colombia, and now teaching here at FIU, right? So maybe the points that we may address will be related to constitutional law, to international public law, etc. So bear with me in the sense that I put together my best approach to the questions posted by Alejandro. So I will not disclose the entire presentation right away. I will just address the first one. And the first one was precisely that that situation that happened now, judicially talking, when we have Maduro being judged by the US court in the United States. And we also have Maduro under an investigation at the ICC, at the International Criminal Court of Justice. So the key question that, for an international point of view, exists is, okay, what happened with the case at the ICC, right? Now that we have this new case at the US. Well, bottom line is that they might coexist, legally talking. They might coexist in the sense that there are kind of different grounds in the US courts and in the ICC. We might say that the ICC is based on the crimes against humanity, and in the case of the US, we are talking about narco trafficking, right? Let me pause a little bit here because I would like to make a reference. We have been talking a lot about narco trafficking and the fight against narco trafficking, narcotics, etc., drugs. Let me tell you something. When you assess criminal economies, nowadays, the drug dealers and the narco trafficking is not the main business of the criminal players. They have contraband, they have human trafficking, they have money laundering. They have, it's a business. It's a business. So focusing only on narco trafficking will not actually cover the entire scope of that criminal activity. So with the first question that we have here regarding this connection or this coexistence of the US court trial and the ICC? Well, the international rule is that the ICC will enter only as a complementary kind of effort in case a domestic solution is not possible or is unable to be achieved, right? But in this case, the question is not necessarily legal. How doing that in hands of one country like the US will jeopardize all the efforts that has been granted by the multilateral system, by the international justice, that might be not so fast as we expect. Maybe we'll not have that kind of right-away solution, but at least is the solution that after the Second World War was achieved in the globe, right? So if we're talking about international law and the protection of the multilateral system, of course, this type of action might jeopardize those sort of global solutions, the consensus of doing something, and maybe somebody might raise their hand and say, look, Victor, the Venezuelan cannot wait any longer. The Venezuelan situation cannot wait any longer, and we need to somehow redefine, think again about the international law concept, but as a separate discussion. So in conclusion to this first question, Alejandro, I will say that legally talking, we might have the two trials, the two instances, the international one and the US one, moving in parallel without a major legal issue.
Mm-hmm. As a continuation of that same question for Ofelia, the release of 139 prisoners following the January 3rd raid has been framed as stability gesture. How do you prevent human rights of becoming human rights as a bargaining chip from becoming a new standard in diplomatic relations?
That's a good question. I think, unfortunately, it's too late in the case of Venezuela to prevent the political prisoners being used as bargaining chips. They have already been used as bargaining chips and are still being used as such. The release of these political prisoners in these last few weeks has been opaque. It has been conditional. It has not followed the procedures laid out, of course, by the Venezuelan legal framework. Families are standing outside of prisons waiting to hear some news of their loved ones. Most of the times they don't even know whether their relatives are inside any specific prison. And the releases have come in the middle of the night with no accompanying documents, no official hearings, no official decisions by any court, any tribunal. So they have been done in such an informal way that most of these political prisoners that have been released are unaware of their legal status. They don't know whether they still have criminal proceedings open against them. And so it has been a process that re-victimizes not only those political prisoners, but their families as well. And so they have been used, political prisoners, I mean, in different instances over the last couple of years. Whenever the Maduro regime has seen itself under considerable international pressure, it has used the release of political prisoners as sort of an escape valve, like to reduce pressure upon itself. And I think this is another example of that. In order for the release of the prisoners to contribute towards a reestablishment of the rule of law and to cease to be that practice of bargaining chips, it would have to be part of a comprehensive, right-informed framework in which the liberation follows formal procedures. Criminal proceedings are closed, in which the releases are unconditional, which is an important part of it, because most of these political prisoners, the ones, for example, that are citizens of Spain and were immediately sent on a plane to Spain, they were forbidden from speaking publicly about their cases. And so you see that there are still conditions imposed upon these prisoners, and some of them have been asked in Spain, since you're out of the country, why do you not, offer public declarations about what you have been through? And they have mentioned that their families who still remain in Venezuela are under threat by security forces. So really, it's not as I was saying before, this is not part of a true liberalization of the Rodriguez regime. It is, unfortunately, another use of political prisoners and a re-victimization of these individuals who never should have been detained.
Right. I want to continue with you. Because the U.S. is reportedly offering conditional amnesties to the military high command to ensure a peaceful transition. Where is the red line between political pragmatism and the victim's right to truth and reparation for the events of Operation Tuntun?
Well, reported proposals for conditional amnesties to members of the armed forces and security corps in Venezuela, they of course aim at securing cooperation for a peaceful transition. And amnesties are common within a context of a political transition, which I want to stress is not here yet. However, if the country does arrive at a true transition process, at a true democratization, an amnesty could certainly be a part of that process. The red line really under international law for amnesties is that they cannot be general blanket amnesties. Amnesties cannot be used to release people from their criminal responsibility in cases of grave human rights violations, which are the types of violations that have been committed in Venezuela. So these crimes that I was mentioning before that constitute a widespread and systematic attack against the civilian population, including torture, arbitrary detentions, political persecution, among others, they cannot be covered by an amnesty under international law. Another thing that is important to mention is that an amnesty in and of itself does not configure a transitional justice process. In order for there to be a robust transitional justice process that contributes to the consolidation of a democracy, there needs to be a comprehensive approach to justice. So that would include not only an amnesty, but also other mechanisms that ensure that victims have their rights to truth, to reparations, and to reconciliation. So the use of an amnesty in and of itself does not really contribute to transitional justice if it is not accompanied also by, let's say, efforts towards documenting the human rights violations, such as a Truth Commission, for example, institutional reforms that guarantee non-recurrence of these human rights violations. So really, an amnesty is just one part of what could be, if a transition comes along, a transitional justice process. And again, even an amnesty has limits. So it cannot aim to cover all of the gross human rights violations that have been committed by the armed forces under Maduro and now under the Rodriguez siblings.
Well, especially that it's not only the political structure that contributes to these human rights violations, but because it started the negotiation of regular neighbors that sometimes without facts.
Yes, and I know you mentioned Operation Tuntun specifically.
Absolutely.
For those who are unfamiliar, Operation Tuntun has been documented as a policy, a strategy used by the government, especially after the 2024 election, in which people perceived to be opponents of the regime are sought after even in their homes by security forces who just knock on their door and say, I saw you post on social media celebrating that Edmundo González Urrutia supposedly won the election, so you need to come with us. And so people being arbitrarily detained because of social media posts or because simply they participated in a protest, were near the site of a protest, and other unjustified motives for detention. In Venezuela, a detention is arbitrary if there is no arrest warrant and the person is not caught at the moment of commission of a crime. And so Operation Tuntun was a widespread form of these detentions following the 2024 election, and they were televised, sometimes live streamed, posted on social media, so that people, would fear meeting the same fate if they dared protest the fraudulent election. So that has been widely documented by international human rights bodies as one of the opportunities in which the state reactivated its most violent repression forms to quash dissent. But just as Operation Tuntun, there have been many other instances in which, again, the state has violated human rights in a gross way. And so any transitional justice that contributes towards the democratization really needs to address multiple instances of human rights violations and not only Operation Tuntun.
Yeah, and Operation Tuntun also has this technological side, where there's an app that regular people can use, neighbors can use to make the denunciation. So the Russians provide an app for the government to distribute that app, download an app, and make these kind of denunciations of political dissidents and people that don't want to collaborate with the regime. So that makes it even more scary.
Yeah, of course. The goal of using that app is having citizens turn on each other and just increase the general sense of fear and control. But I think that the overview is important here, and that is just but one of the instances of many similar instances of human rights violations that would need to be addressed by any transitional justice process.
Right. And we would like to see that there's some advance in human rights and also in establishing some democratic institutions. And the New York Times is being criticized recently for profiling Delcy Rodríguez as a pragmatist and someone that would care about human rights and that would be the only great negotiator with businessmen from United States and Europe. So they are profiling her as something that has nothing to do with repression and that has no background on these kind of strategies. So first, I would like to know your impression about the job that the New York Times is doing in covering the crisis in Venezuela.
I would say that not only the New York Times, Washington Post, and some other newspapers, big newspapers, they've been helping because they've been trying to do it. But I mean, it's difficult to report from Venezuela or of Venezuela because there are, a lot of enemies that might harm them. But you gave me a piece to go with something that in Venezuela is really needed now more than anything else. You remember that Radio Caracas Televisión and some other media was closed by this government. They closed this media, and we need the media, but the United States hasn't said anything about it. I mean, I know that it's only a few days after they took out Maduro, but the problem is that in Venezuela, it's difficult to inform. I'm going to have in about 1 hour, 1.5 hour, a podcast with a reporter who was expelled from 2 different media because of the government. The government called the media, 1 television station and 1 radio station, and told them, you have to fire that person or we're going to have consequences. But the problem is, I spoke to Marcel Granier, he's the president of Radio Caracas Televisión, about 10 days ago, and I asked him the question, what's going to happen to Radio Caracas Televisión? I mean, you lose it, you don't want to have it back? He said, we are working not only in Venezuela, but out of Venezuela, because we have legally demanding the right to have back that channel station. I said, well, do you think now you can have it? He said, well, we have to wait. I think he was afraid to mention Mr. Trump because he's making business now to have the channel back. But going back to your question, I think the New York Times, Washington Post, and European newspapers, they were afraid to keep on pushing in Venezuela because of the repression. As she was saying, Tuntun was one of the last things that they did. But yesterday I spoke to Foro Penal. Foro Penal is a rights organization that is working to help prisoners in Venezuela, political prisoners. And he told me that they now know of places well known as jails, known jails in Venezuela. In other words, they were using private homes to have detainees there. So there were prisoners in places that nobody knows where they are. And not only that, the thing is, families didn't say anything at all because they were negotiating by money or by any other extortion to have the families back or whoever they want to have back in the house. So media is really needed in Venezuela now, and they are ready to do it. Miguel Enrique Otero, El Nacional editor, is living in Spain now. He told me that he wants to go back to Venezuela and recover his newspaper because Diosdado Cabello took his properties there. The newspaper is working from overseas because if they go back to Venezuela, they are in trouble. But they are expecting, and we are back to the topic we were talking before. It's too early to say that something is going to happen now in different aspects of the Venezuelan life, media, economy, and you name it.
Do you think that the United States government has the capacity of negotiating these kind of deals with Delcy in sense of opening the chance to establish or reestablish freedom of expression in Venezuela?
If the government of the United States pressured her to do it, she'll do it. Otherwise, she won't. Because they got a lot of trouble with the media, and they are the ones who closed the media there. They closed Radio Caracas Televisión, Radio Caracas Radio. I used to work in both medias in those companies. And now we don't know what's going to happen because Radio Caracas closed business, and now to recover is going to be difficult because nobody is announcing in Venezuela. In other words, these private companies leave, they leave because the commercials, the advertising that they have, and nobody's advertising in Venezuela because there is nothing to advertise. I mean, if you don't have product to sell, what are you going to advertise? So the problem is the private media is still under the government, including Delcy and all, In Venezuela, people say, well, you took Alibaba, but the 40 thieves are still in charge. And now we have, they say, well, what happened is that now Mr. Trump has, you remember the Charlie Angels? Well, now Trump Angels, Delcy and Maria Corina.
I want to open, yeah, you can add something.
I just want to add a comment very quickly on that question about Delcy Rodríguez. I think it's very important to know who Delcy Rodríguez is. She's a more unknown figure, of course. The most internationally toxic figure that the regime had was Maduro. But Delcy Rodríguez is not new. She's not a moderate, and she's been sold as a moderate frequently these last few days because of her pragmatism to enter into negotiations. But her political career began under Hugo Chavez. She and her brother, who is the president of the National Assembly, are children of Jorge Rodríguez Sr., who during the 40 years of democracy, he carried out a kidnapping of an American businessman who was in Venezuela. He was imprisoned for that kidnapping and unfortunately was tortured and later passed away. So both Delcy and Jorge Rodríguez began their political careers as sort of a personal vendetta against the Venezuelan establishment, and they have said so publicly. So they, especially her, she's really not a moderate. She's one of the main figures in the most radical wings of Chavismo. And between the years of 2018 and 2021, as vice president, she headed the SEBIN, which is the Bolivarian Intelligence Services. It is an agency that has been pointed as responsible for most of the human rights violations laid out as crimes against humanity. She had direct knowledge of these violations and was at the head of the agents who were carrying them out. So I think it's important to know that the adjective of moderate doesn't really go with the profile that Delcy has had. And it's important to know who really is in charge in Venezuela. So I think that was important to add.
Another comment, because I think we all need to picture what is happening. With what was saying about the media outlets, I will never forget being in Venezuela and looking at Celia Flores and Iris Varela and another people from the Chavismo out of Radio Caracas saying, close that media outlet, so close that TV channel, close it, screaming like crazy outside of the media facilities. So in other words, these people are no different. These are the people who has been running the country for the last 2 decades or so. So we really need to picture that in our minds. Thank you.
Very good.
I'm going to be in Agua Fiestas here. And I just want to say it's totally unrealistic for anyone to think for a minute that Trump cares about free speech or press in Venezuela. He doesn't even think about it. It doesn't occur to him. And the proof is he doesn't care about democracy in Venezuela. He doesn't care if you have a transition or not. He tried to overthrow the United States election in 2020. He violates the law and the Constitution every single day. His lickspittle followers do the same thing. So how can you possibly imagine that he gives one whit about Venezuelan democracy? He wants the oil. That's it. That's all he wants.
Okay, very good. If you had a question or a comment?
This is kind of a harsh reality. It's I'm curious of your comments about my perspective of Venezuela. Dovetailing what this gentleman just said, I've worked with Donald Trump for 6 years. I know this animal. He doesn't care one iota for Venezuela. As much as, you know, as intellectuals, you like to delve into the complexities and the gray areas, you're dealing with a predatory animal who just looks at the world in black and white. Everything is a zero-sum game. The only interest he has in oil is to keep it away from China. Other than that, we don't need the oil. And it's not even oil that is easy to process cheaply. It's very expensive. And we have enough oil, and we have other sources of oil. We don't need Venezuela. Maduro is simply a trophy, kind of like if anyone's read Shakespeare, the Titus Andronicus, where they brought back the queen of the Goths to Rome. Maduro is just a spoil of war. That's all he is. And for Venezuelans to rejoice about him leaving, I purely understand that. And I don't mean any offense to Venezuela, but you're dealing with a man who looks upon most countries as, and I use his term, shithole countries. Venezuela, to Trump, is a shithole country. He doesn't care about your human rights. He doesn't care about your political prisoners. All he cares about is his legacy. At this point, he's just looking, because of his hubris, all he cares about is his legacy. He wants to be seen in history as being the Teddy Roosevelt, where he controlled this sphere of influence. In fact, they changed the name of Monroe Doctrine to Donroe Doctrine. He thrives on this. And that's all he cares about. This whole administration being run by him, it's a fascist regime, and his supplicants just follow everything, and he controls all the levers of power, no different than in South America.
Do you have a question?
My question is, I'm curious, do you have a comment with regard to the hegemony that Trump is trying to exact with his foreign policy?
That is the panel for this afternoon. So stay tuned. At 1:30, they're going to talk exactly about that. So at 1:30, the panel is going to talk about international relations and the U.S. foreign policy. Exactly. Yes. So thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for your brilliant thoughts on Venezuela's present and future. My name is Guilherme Casarões. I'm a social professor of Brazilian studies here at FIU. And I have a very quick question. I know that we'll be having a panel on international dimensions of the Venezuelan crisis. But I'd like to hear from you about the precedent that was set by President Trump when he ousted Maduro and captured him and brought him to the United States. Sovereignty has always been a very important issue for Latin American countries. And I say this as a Brazilian citizen. President Trump just posted a few days ago on Truth Social this image of a fake Wikipedia page saying that he was the acting president of Venezuela, and he has never lied about his intentions of going after the oil of the country. So it sets a very dangerous precedent for the entire region. How will Venezuelans, the Venezuelan society, the Venezuelan institutions, deal with this precedent opened by President Trump's actions in terms of how will the country deal with, recovering its sovereignty for the future? Thank you.
With international sovereignty.
Okay, I take it. Again, I think when we look at that legal concept of sovereignty, has been evolving, and the easy answer here is, well, why countries will agree to be part of the OECD or the United Nations or the American States Organization, right? Somehow the states and the countries has been evolving in that specific concept. If that will justify an action for a different isolated nation to enter into another nation with the excuse of taking a person that has been accused of narcoterrorism, that's the big question. That's the big question. And again, I don't think, honestly, and this is my opinion, I don't think the evolution of the concept of sovereignty will allow these type of things.
Just to add to that, I know it's been under discussion these days whether that action or this military operation was lawful under international law. And the short, quick answer is no, it's not lawful under international law. However, since we're talking about sovereignty, it's also important to point out that Venezuela had lost its sovereignty already. We had a de facto ruler who had disrespected the decision of the majority of Venezuelans when they voted for Edmundo González Urrutia. So Venezuela was no longer a sovereign country. It wasn't an exercise of its sovereignty before this military operation happened. And yes, this is a breach of international law. The other side of the coin is that this breach opens up a door for a transition, hopefully, if the stars align, that was not open before. In addition to that, I'm sorry. In addition to that, it's kind of a double-sided coin, because you also can point to all the breaches of international law that were committed by the regime and that have been committed for years now. So if you care, let's say if you're going to place an important weight on the traditional concept of sovereignty and the illegality of this military operation, you should also care about the breaches of international law that have been happening in Venezuela for years.
Just to add more pepper on that answer. I fully agree with Ofelia, but to add more pepper on that spicy on your question, it's fantastic. I should say that this has been showing the crisis at the multilateral system, because we were believing, for a long time, please do something. Please intervene, and nothing was happening. So for me, in a way, this type of situation are showing not only a crisis on the concept of sovereignty, but also a crisis on the multilateral system.
You're going to pass the microphone over there, and then you. Yes.
I would like to know the opinion of you all in 3 subjects. First of all, there's nothing in Venezuela either legit or legal. No CNA, no president, no Asamblea Nacional. We should be the order to restore morality, democracy, and legacy in Venezuela. On the other side, economy. They already approved in first discussion the new hydrocarbon law. Pretty much what it was expected for the National Assembly of 2015. By the way, Venezuela is known to have like 3 presidents, 3 National Assembly. That's a record. So being that said, it seems like definitely Trump is pushing towards what he wants. You all say that, I do agree. I would say, besides that the most close people or person that Venezuelans could realize that looks like Trump is Chavez, but from the right. It's incredible how you see the people in the United States. It's like we are coming from the future. You see the people in the United States, the governors, the political parties, trying to understand what the leader said. Makes no sense, but they go for it and they start to explain what he meant, what he wanted to say. We already lived that with Chavez. Nothing to say about Maduro. That's worse. And finally, media. I come from a family that still owns a building where Panorama newspaper, the second in circulation in Venezuela, we own everything, the building, but we were not allowed to buy paper, not from the US, not from Canada, not from Finland. And the last thing they could do was blocking us on internet. So we only are able to have Twitter and Instagram. So saying that, there's no way in Venezuela, Miguel Otero knows, and the Radio Caracas television knows that they have to invest a lot of money to recover those buildings, those machines, and there's no marketing over there. The marketing we have right now is by social media. So how do you restart the medias in a country that seems it's completely broken, and there's nobody like willing to bring out the truth of what's going on there? The United States and you all people in here that are trying to help Venezuela, a change in Venezuela, must go back to find out from the inside, from the Venezuelan society, from the Venezuelan people, to understand what's the reality over there. I heard people saying that the criminality is the main thing in Venezuela. Not anymore. As the people there, they feel a lot better than 20 years ago, by the way. Now with the money that's coming, 300 millions that went to the Banco Central de Venezuela, the problem with the dollar, non-official dollar and the official dollar went down. So people are happy with that. They don't see much farther than what's going on today. What could we do about it?
Well, I'm going to kill 3 birds with one shot. 1, 2, and 3. You're right. I didn't want to touch that because I didn't want to take too much time with that. But I'm the most pessimistic at this moment about Venezuelan future with Trump in power in the United States. We have to wait until he goes away that we can see something good for Venezuela, because you're right. He cares about oil and his business, period. Number 2, you're right. That's the animal that's going to be here for 3 more years. And until then, we don't know what's going to happen in Venezuela. Whatever happens in Venezuela is unpredictable because we don't have a legit government. We are not going on a way to democracy. The institutions are all in the hands of the government. More political prisoners are going to be there. As I told you before, there are plenty of people still in jail, and they don't even mention those cases. They left Edmundo González, son-in-law, out because there was a lot of noise about that, and well, it's a long story. And in regards to media, right, I was mentioning that because that's one way to start opening the Venezuelan society again. I don't think Trump cares about that. He doesn't care about the media. On the contrary, he hates the media because the media is telling him things that he doesn't like. So in Venezuela, I think to have the media that we have 30 years ago, 25 years ago, I don't see it soon. So that's what I want to say.
I would like to take the students' questions.
I can enunciate. You guys
Because there are people online.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. It was my own clarity that the political prisoners are those that openly oppose Maduro's regime. So I just wanted to ask and get some clarity of what constitutes someone as a political prisoner and what constitutes them as a political hostage and what those that are opposing look like.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's a good question. Political prisoners are the prisoners that are currently detained under arbitrary conditions, not meeting the requirements of the Venezuelan framework for a detention, and having cases or criminal proceedings opening up against them due to political motives. In other words, having them accused of different crimes under the Venezuelan criminal code due to their opposition to the regime. So many of the crimes that have been used have been treason, incitement for hatred, these very serious crimes under our criminal code, but within facts that are not really related to the element of those crimes, but the fact that they are perceived to be opponents of the regime. And so these people are often detained, you know, as I said, without an arrest warrant, without having them commit any particular crime, then are subject frequently to enforced disappearance. Under the Venezuelan legal framework, they should be presented before a court of law within 48 hours of detention. That generally doesn't happen. They are generally forced to sign waivers saying that they have been treated well, that they have been seen by a doctor, which also needs to happen under the Venezuelan law. And then hearings are conducted in the middle of the night. They are private. Detainees don't have access to their attorneys. Sometimes they are subject to torture. They are taken to these clandestine detention centers that are all over the country. And then because of the judiciary has been co-opted and emptied as well, judges in the criminal circuits often collaborate with these proceedings and, you know, impose penalties upon these people who really have committed no crime. So it's not often that the political prisoners are public figures or that they dedicate themselves to politics. It can be just any regular person that is perceived to be an opponent of the regime with no further proof.
Hello. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Alvarado because he told me about this event. So thank you for inviting me. My question for you guys is, what can we expect exactly, not only from Venezuela, from the entire Hispanidad as a whole, knowing that there has been military intervention that has took our sovereignty away? And how can we, like that, be talking about sovereignty, democracy, or media if we are not realizing that our potential to be sovereign comes from uniting? I am from Spain, by the way, and I think that we have a huge potential to unify each other and to face our problems, but this is we are not doing it because we are legitimizing that somebody else is taking care of the problems that we should resolve as the civilization we are. So what can we expect about that?
Yeah, Victor.
Very quickly, I will answer with a story. In a certain period of this Venezuela situation, a center of thinking, a think tank, organized a kind of an interview for the candidates, for the opposition candidates, to select who will run the presidential election against Maduro back then. So, and one of the participants in these interviews were Diego Arria. Diego Arria actually was the member of the Security Council at the United Nations, and he was telling the following story. He said, during the negotiation of the peace process in Nicaragua, Felipe González from Spain, Carlos Andrés Pérez from Venezuela, and Diego Arria, who was the secretary of Carlos Andrés Pérez and the commission to negotiate the peace with Daniel Ortega, he was so surprised that Daniel Ortega said, I will sign the peace, but that finca, that asset that I have, I will keep it. I will keep it. And then Diego Arria was saying, look, how can we deal with this guy? We're signing the peace, and he's a criminal. So Felipe González, Spain, Carlos Andrés Pérez said, Dieguito, hold the horses. If we would like to achieve the peace, we need to let Daniel Ortega to keep their assets. What happened, that was on the 70s, right? What happened later that we have Daniel Ortega now in Nicaragua? So I'm with you in the sense that when we are living this type of transitions, it's so complex, actually, and Andrea was posting the different scenarios in order to achieve something that will be sustainable in time, right? So we'll see. So
yeah. There was
my story.
Someone there, yeah. That's a good story.
Well, thank you so much for everything that you are sharing here. I would like to recommend a book that is a key point now to understand what's going on all over the world. This book is by two professors from Harvard, Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Siebert, How Democracies Die. And I would like to bring a quote specifically, because it's not only about Chavez, Maduro. There is something happening before that is important to know. Because in some point, if we talk about democracy, now everyone is talking about democracy, but which type of democracy we are talking about? That's the key point. Then let me bring that, it's a very short quote. The abdication of political responsibility by existing leaders often marks a nation's first step toward authoritarianism. Years after Chavez's presidential victory, Rafael Caldera, okay, he was not a dictator, right? Okay. Rafael Caldera explained his mistakes simply. Nobody thought that Mr. Chavez had even the remotest chance of becoming president. Then, telling this, I had different questions about the international law solution. How is possible to have that chance if in last week in the White House website, we saw all the institutions in the UN that the US is withdrawing? That's one of the questions. Second one, I'm so happy, Astrid, that you were mentioning our main actor if we talk about democracy. And he is Edmundo González. I'm so sorry to say that. He is the disappeared actor here. Nobody is talking about who the other leader in the opposition in Venezuela, and I'm so sorry to say that. If we are talking about democracy, real democracy, if you are using him, I mean, because she was not allowed to be part of the democracy at that moment, then they were using Edmundo to get that legitimacy as a president. Why we don't talk clearly about bringing him back? He's the power. He's the representative of the sovereignty. Then it's amazing that you are bringing him so many times, because in so many articles, I don't listen nothing about this man that I need to say, and I'm with this amazing student. I'm from Spain. You know, it's not shocking for me that Felipe González was telling that at that moment. And I'm so sorry to say that, because Felipe González is a very different leader now. Okay? And that's the only thing. Then why Edmundo González is not vindicated as the real representative of the sovereignty of... Okay?
Very good. When's the day one? Astrid.
I did it on purpose. Because when Alejandro was asking me the question about Maria Corina, I said, you have to include him. You have to include Edmundo González, because he was the one who won the elections, according to all this evidence that was provided. But she has been articulating, monopolizing the narrative of the opposition, of the democratic, legitimate opposition, but he is the winner. So if I envision any future talks, conversations with the opposition, I think Edmundo González has to be there, present. And not only Edmundo González, there are other members of the Venezuelan opposition that should be included too, that are not necessarily on the side of Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo González.
Very good.
Yes. Position, that's a problem.
Dr. Mora.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So 2 quick questions. Ophelia, on the issue of amnesty, I have a political question, not a legal question. And that is that I suspect that one of the reasons why Maduro perhaps didn't take that amnesty is because amnesty from a political standpoint has a bad track record. What do I mean by that? You're given amnesty now, but it's removed in 5, 10 years. We've seen that in other dictators, and that really removes that tool as a way of reconciliation and transition. So I wonder if you can speak to that. To my colleague Astrid, on the issue of democratic transition, I've been struck, not in this discussion, but in other discussions that we're having, that the issue of transition is always talked about what the outside actors can do. Transitions are fundamentally internal domestic processes. And then external can have a secondary supporting role. So what are the conditions for transition within the country? For that, you need a vibrant civil society that is engaged, that is communicating, there's media, there's social mobilization, people in the streets. There's none of that in Venezuela at the moment. At the moment, I don't know about to, but at the moment, there's none of that. And without those forces of change within, there's nothing that the external can do, even if Donald Trump was committed to the notion of democracy, which of course is. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to jump in. It's not for me, but I'm going to jump in with one comment about the second question. And I want to say, and this needs to be highlighted, Venezuelans have been in the streets for a long, long time. They're not in the streets now because of repression. I'm just going to,
100%.
I'm sorry about jumping into that, but that's something worth saying.
They weren't, I'm sorry to say this, but they weren't even able to see Maria Corina Machado when she received the Premio Nobel because it was forbidden.
I'm sorry. So.
People online, so you have to use the microphone.
This is critical.
Okay.
What we're seeing in Iran, what we saw of seeing in the Republic of Georgia, what we saw in Bangladesh, and a few other cases, where the people in the streets, it is true, after the election of July 2024, people went on the streets. There was an instance. But the problem is that to incite or to provoke change, those protests need to be sustained and need to be confrontational with the regime. Now, listen, that's very easy for me, living in the comforts of Washington, D.C., to say the Venezuelans should risk their lives. It's very easy for me to do that. But I am just talking from a social science perspective, and the empirical evidence in our literature and even current events says that a sustained confrontational social mobilization is a requirement of change. If that's not happening, and so it happened in July 2024 for a period of time, and then due to repression and other factors, people went home. It happened in 2018, 2019. It's not happening now. Why do I think it's not happening now? Because everyone is expecting Donald Trump to solve the problem.
Right.
So why am I going to go out on the street, risk my life if I think Donald Trump is going to solve the problem? That's so the U.S. policy in this perspective is actually working against democratic transition in some ways. Okay, now I will really shut up.
For how many years have Venezuelans been in the streets?
I'm not sure if I meant to comment. I really want to, but I know that's for her. I have some disagreements there. I think Venezuelans have done it all. And here I may be biased because I am a Venezuelan, and I have seen people on the streets. Unfortunately, I've had very painful experiences up close with people who have lost it all because of being on the streets. And I definitely think it's easier for us from the United States to say, go out and risk your lives, but the risk is very real. The risk has been very real for a long time. After July 28 in 2024, there were 915 protests registered throughout the country in 2 days. And also more than 1,600 people detained and tortured. So that's got to be taken into account. I think Venezuelans face a very real risk. The armed forces have not turned against the regime, which is why, these nationwide cycles of protests of 2014, 2017, 2019, they've all been brutally repressed and nothing happens within the armed forces. And I think people have learned from that experience. As to why there are no protests now, I believe fear is the main reason. And I say this because the streets of Caracas in the days following January 3rd were filled with colectivos, paramilitary groups, long weapons, stopping people and telling them, give me your phone. I want to see if you've celebrated what happened with Maduro. So people, they're waiting to see how this all will unfold. I don't think it's so much as waiting for Donald Trump to solve the problems as I'm very fearful for what this might become. The truth is, and I am with you, I think this might end up being an opportunity for Chavismo to recalibrate and stay in power with more strength than before because it is now backed by the United States. So I think that will turn out to be, disastrous for a country that has been suffering for too long. So I'm sorry, I jumped in. I'm sorry.
Very good.
I had to. As for the amnesty, I think your question was related to the fact that the amnesty could be sort of offered and then taken away. I think it has more to do, and I do think that's a valid point, but I think it has more to do with the fact that the amnesty can't cover it all. I don't think an amnesty could be enacted saying, you were ordering people to commit crimes against humanity, but that's fine. You're completely, released of criminal responsibility. That from a legal standpoint would not stand. And from a political one, I think it wouldn't stand either. So that's more the issue for me, but I do see your point, and I know that experience has shown that amnesties may not be permanent.
Victor.
Just very quickly, because I know that we are running out of time, but I think should be, Ophelia, a combination of the two of the two comments that you are making on this point. It's not only because of fear, it's also because something happened. I'm sorry to tell, I'm Venezuelan too, in the DNA of the Venezuelan, that they get used to the situation beyond being reality, I will say. So yes, it's fear. Yes, there are colectivos on the street, but at the same time, the theory of the hombre nuevo, the new man, that theory somehow was posted in the Venezuelan people, somehow. So we need to go under, we need to go deeper of the surface that is not only fear, right?
Yeah, there's a question here.
Very short to Dr. Mora. I agree with you about how difficult this, how unlikely a transition could take place with all these conditions that you described. And it's Venezuelans expect the U.S. to help them if there's a transition, because the U.S. took the role of unlocking this puzzle by taking Maduro out of the equation. So for Venezuelans, my perspective is that my perception is that they expect the U.S. to put more pressure on Delcy Rodríguez and this alliance so they can open up something that can lead to a transition. But I agree with you, the conditions are horrific. But what you need for a transition is willingness from different actors, from the hardliners, the softliners. I don't know who the softliners are. Delcy Rodríguez is a hardliner. Her civil-military alliance is they're hardliners. Maria Corina is a hardliner. She is cornered to the right wing of the political spectrum right now by siding with Donald Trump and his administration. So where are the softliners that you need to come together to talk, to negotiate? Well, maybe Donald Trump will force Delcy Rodríguez to become maybe softer or not, or she will resist. I don't know. I'm just telling you. The theory tells us you need softliners to come together to find some common ground, to move away from an authoritarian regime.
Okay, and last one.
So sorry.
Here?
Yeah, we need
One more?
one more
Right here,
question, then we will need to close. We're ran out of time.
Just a fast comment. The Venezuelan military is truly effective. It's probably one of the most effective military organizations in the hemisphere. Although, yes, they're citizens, but there's a tradition, and there's a very structured organization against any kind of rebellion. This is historically. So we're dealing with a tough regime that is very capable and that has been enforced by Cubans, Russians, and even Iranians and Hezbollah. So you have the combination that it's
Yeah,
there.
thank you for everything. That's amazing. But I'm gonna be more optimistic at the end of the things, because in any situation we have threat, but also we have opportunities. And I think we have to talk about the opportunities that Venezuela has. Even the threat, we have a lot of opportunity. Before Maduro, we have no hope. Now we have hope. We are, in this meeting because we have hope. I know that we have leading with a beast. We know that. But we have opportunity with this beast because he is concerned for something that we are agreed with. Because Venezuela has oil, and this is an opportunity. If we were Cuba, we were still with Maduro in place. Okay, that's a reality, and we have to face that. We have to be ready to negotiate as with our own, interest, and we have to do it. And I think we have to deal with this and be prepared with a very good guideline for the opposition. We have to talk in this way. We have to really give this view because we are outside. They are inside. I work directly with the people in Venezuela because I have a foundation that works with malnourished kids. I know the people that they are living. And you know what happened today? They are concerned about if they are going to receive the clap again. If we are going to receive the bonus because they live for this. What happened when they are not received that? You know what they are expecting? The money that comes from the United States because they are going to be paid in dollars. Believe or not, this is the thing that the normal people, that's the reality there. Absolutely. They have to survive. But I have to say something else. Venezuela made something remarkable. I haven't seen this before. We won an election and we can demonstrate to the world that we won the election. And you know why we did that? Because Maria Corina could organize internally the country with the vulnerable people to take the act and preserve it and put it in the place that they were these days. This is something remarkable. We can do it again in another way to place the transition, but we have to work all together in this sense. Yeah. We cannot be, around saying all the threat. We have a lot of threat, but we have a lot of strength into the country, working in place, and we have to see that. This is the only thing. And my question for you is, what is the best option for a good optimistic
Well, I see an opportunity for you.
If you don't mind.
I think that you need your own Fundación Nacional Cubano-Americana, Fundación Nacional Venezolana-Americana. The diaspora and the power of the diaspora as a lobbying group to shape public policy, foreign policy. Foreign policy in the United States, it's done in Hialeah. So you need your own national foundation.
Yeah, Professor, if you don't mind, I would like to add something very briefly. Please.
You need a microphone, excuse me. So they can hear your line.
Yeah. I would try.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I would try.
Rápido.
As a former ambassador from Venezuela to Canada in the interim government, in the recent days, I had faced many interviews in Canada about what's going on in Venezuela. I would like to introduce two concepts in one little reflection. First, and a journalist in French asked me, Monsieur Ambassadeur, qu'est-ce que vous pensez de la invasión de Donald Trump a Venezuela? So, first concept, it's not an invention. It's not a diplomacy issue. It was an enforcement issue. And we have to conceal enforcement law, international law. It's not a brief of international law. If we don't understand that concepts, we're going to be in trouble to understand the transcendency of that action first.
Second, the concept of legitimate defense, which appeared in the Charter of United Nations. Legitimate defense, which, by the way, is a concept many centuries before 1945 of the Charter of United Nations. Venezuela need legitimate defense. Just myself, I have 2,000 complaints in the International Criminal Court, 2,000. And in total, the calculation is about 20,000. Torture, assassination, prosecution, disappears forces. Telling to the victims that horrible and horrendous crimes against humanity, if they mind about the action in Venezuela. It's a light in the dark. It's a hope. So just to conclude, I'm telling French to the journalists, ce n'est pas de rien de una cuestión de Donald Trump. No es una cuestión de Donald Trump. It's nothing in relation with an actor. It's in relation a non-president situation with a non-president transition in the world. Think about it. And then we can talk about human rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you to everybody. We will resume. We will have a break now. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you. Víctor Hugo Guerra y Julio César. Okay, we will resume at 1:30 for the second panel. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to continue. Claudia, are we ready for the online side?
Yes. I think
that's why he brings up on 3 minutes.
So with that, we'll continue with our international implications panel. So with that, I will turn to Manny.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Cruz. Good afternoon. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for rejoining us, especially thanks to our online audiences. There were 76 people participating from the webinar and attending your questions, comments, and everything that is happening here today. Actually, we had a few questions there that we didn't have a chance. Maybe we can have the opportunity to answer those questions at the end of the panelists' presentation. So we will now begin panel 2. The title is The International and Economic Dimensions. The session will be moderated by Manny Garcia, who is the Knight Foundation Executive Director at the Lee Kaplan School of Journalism and Media. He is a 2-time Pulitzer Prize recipient and FIU alumnus with decades on investigative reporting experience. This session will feature the following panelists: Antonio Delgado, Edward Glab, Felix Martin, and Frank Mora. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And I'm probably going to turn the microphone off. I think my voice carries. Oh, you need it on because of the folks on? Yeah. Got it. Okay, so I'll stick with that. So we're going to talk about the international implications, and we had a robust discussion this morning. First of all, I want to say I'm a very proud Panther, FIU grad, And everything that's good about FIU, I am it. And if you're a student here, and if you ever feel down about yourself, I was on academic probation. I had an F. I had been pushed out of the school. I had to beg my way back in. And for you who've been here a long time, there was a dean named Fred Boma, who I sat with the last day to register in school, and he gave me a chance. And here I am today because of the actions of one man, and I took that chance. So if you're students or whoever, this is a great school, and there's no place like it. So thank you. Not about me, man. It's a God thing, clearly. So I want to talk about the Venezuela story here, first of all. Venezuela plays an outsized role in our community. Everything that happens in Venezuela is a local story for us. Venezuelans living here contribute to the economy in a big way, politically, economically, from food, music, sports, baseball, if you think about that. And there's no institution better positioned to be a part of the future Venezuela than FIU, where we're centered, the minds and everybody involved here, just you'll hear from members of this panel here. I do want to share a story with you before we hop in there about one of the great and inspiring stories of FIU is in the Lee Kaplan School of Journalism. We have students from Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, who are covering the story, especially right now, the Venezuelan students are covering the story of Venezuela that they would never be able to do in Venezuela. So think about this. They are telling the stories of their country at our newsroom. And you're more than welcome to come, especially on Thursdays. We have a Spanish language broadcast on Kaplan News called Newsbreak, and the reporters are doing the work. It's an incredible body of work that their students are doing here. So with that, thank you. I want to begin by going around just with our esteemed colleagues here. And I want them to give their opening thoughts, and based on what they say, we want to have an open discussion. Feel free to ask questions. But above all, just let's be part of the robust conversation. I've got some questions too, but beyond that, I'm going to really start it off, and I'm going to pick it to Frank in the corner. Let me introduce Frank real quick. He's a professor of politics and international relations at FIU. Dr. Moore is a former U.S. ambassador to the Organization of American States. And from 2013 to 2020, he served as director of the Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center at FIU. So Frank, you're incredibly well positioned to talk about this. So if you can just open up and tell us and give us your thoughts.
Sure. Thank you so much. I thought I'd do three things real quick. One, talk about this discussion notion of the Monroe Doctrine. What does it mean? Yeah. Two, talk a little bit about this idea that one can run, administer, coerce from abroad, another country. And third, then talk a little bit more about the discussion we had, if I may, the transition, if I have time. So the Monroe Doctrine. Okay. So there's been a lot of misunderstanding about what that concept really means. I'm not going to go into all of it, but just the central core part of the Monroe Doctrine was that the United States, as central part of its foreign policy, was going to insist on this notion of strategic denial, this concept of strategic denial. What does that mean? It means that the United States would do whatever was possible to mitigate, to impede the presence of extrahemispheric powers, threatening extrahemispheric powers in the Western Hemisphere. There are other things about the Monroe Doctrine. I'm not going to go into that. Okay, but that's the core. And what's interesting is that when that was pronounced by President Monroe, we were a weak country. It was a statement of weakness, right? Because we had no way of enforcing that Monroe Doctrine unless the British Navy was willing to help, and that didn't work out. So that's one thing. Now, why is that piece important? Because does that mean then that the Monroe Doctrine is to deny the presence, I guess in this case, of China, Russia, and Iran from the Western Hemisphere? Is that what the Monroe Doctrine is? It seems to be if you look at the National Security Doctrine. But that doesn't seem to be the motivation behind what we've seen in Venezuela and in other places. In fact, I really am interested to know how one dislodges China from the major investments in South America, for example, like the Chancay port in Peru and other investments. You recall that in February of last year, the President of the United States put his eye on the Panama Canal. Remember that? Yeah. We've lost sight of that, but that we were going to get the canal back, right? Or at a minimum, we're going to remove the Chinese. 1 year later, Chinese are still in China. So my question is, how are you going to coerce other countries to tell the Chinese to get out when that would be incredibly economically costly for those countries? And the United States is not willing to replace the Chinese investments in those countries. So you have nothing to offer other than coercion. And the Chinese are not going to say, as they've done in Panama, wow, it was a good run, but it's time for us to leave. They're not going to do that. They have major investments. So then this concept of the Dunro Doctrine is historical. It's ahistorical and non-applicable in the world today, or at least that I can tell. So what's going on here, really? And I think this goes back to realism, the theory of realism, which is the president feels that in this part of the world, in this part of the hemisphere, these are weak countries and we can do whatever we want. And we're going to show force here in place, as opposed to showing force in other places that we're not willing to do. And so the world is being, I think we're in a quite dangerous place. We're back to, I think, we're interested to hear what Martin thinks about this, sort of the period before World War I, where we had spheres of influence, and where you had regional hegemons, where the use of force was the currency of the day and led to, or was one of the conditions that led to the World War I. Okay, second point on the idea. I don't know, George, a single case, historical case, where a government, one government can govern and administer another country from afar, right? Without troops, right? That's the piece, right? Without troops on the ground. You have troops on the ground, that's a different story. So what does that actually look like when who is doing the day-to-day things that are involved in governing? Well, Delcy Rodríguez is, right? The United States has essentially relegated the job of governing to a government that he said was illegitimate, right? And is asking that illegitimate government to govern on behalf of the United States, right? That's why I tend to be pessimistic about this notion of democratic transition, right? Because it's not a priority. It's a stated non-priority on the part of the US government. And the president of the United States has said that he thinks Delcy is fantastic and has indicated that she would be, no date yet, will be visiting the Oval Office. Now, I want you to take a visual of this. Imagine as you see the president on the right side, Delcy on the left, with Jorge Rodríguez, Cabello, and Padrino on the side, and then Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, and the vice president on the right side. Beyond the optics, what's the message that's being sent if that happens, and the president says it's going to happen? To me, that would mark the confirmation that there will be no democratic transition, that Delcy is the government, and that will do the things we want to do, specifically in the area of petroleum. Lastly, which leads me to the issue of democratic transition. Suppose that the president was interested in democratic transition, which he's not, but let's suppose that he was interested in democratic transition. How would that look like? I keep repeating the point. I don't know of any historical empirical case in which the dominant force of democratic change and transition came from outside of the country. No case. If you look at all the transitions in Eastern Europe and in South America, Latin America, in the 70s and into the 80s, those were largely, not exclusively, but largely internal processes of change in which society was engaged, They created fractures with the regime that ultimately led to the conditions of democratic transition. At the moment, I don't see those conditions within the country, which is why I tend to be pessimistic. So I think we need to stop thinking that somehow the savior, the transition, democracy will come to Venezuela because the United States wants it to.
Thank you then. Felix, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you real quick. Felix is an associate professor in the Department of Politics. What's that? Professor. Okay. So I have to issue a correction because we have associate here. Transparency in News, we have to issue a correction. Okay. Professor in the Department of Politics and International Relations at the School of International and Public Affairs at FIU. His research focuses on security and peace studies, very timely, and international political economy. Floor is yours, and thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to extend my most sincere appreciation to Jose Miguel, Lizul, and all the members of the LAC for putting together this important and timely event on the U.S. intervention in Venezuela. I know that many of you come here with the hope that perhaps this will lead to an internal transition. I do share my colleagues and friends' pessimism. I do not see that happening. However, having said that, I want to refrain from that because I came here to open up the wide lenses of analysis. In other words, I'm more interested in talking about the implications on intended and unintended implications of the intervention in Venezuela and how that affects the global order or the world order, as we call it. So I have prepared one-third of my presentation is already gone because you already addressed it. That's a risk that we always run when you are the second or the third or the last one, okay? And I very much agree with all he stated precisely about the PRC, the People's Republic of China involved in South America principally and Central and the Caribbean. So I'm going to leave that aside. However, I like to focus more on international law and the precedent that this intervention has for the international system or the global system of world order. I don't subscribe to international law very much. I am not naive not to understand that international law is made by the great powers, and it is made by the great powers to apply to the lesser or to middle powers. However, international law is fundamental. It's fundamental to create coordination on a day-to-day basis. You just cannot go around bullying people to do certain things in the international system. Thus, I believe in international. My subscription is he touched me when he talked about realism is because I subscribe when it comes to security. I am a firm believer in what I call, it is known as classical neorealism. I am not a structural realist. I am not a classical realist. However, it's neoclassical realism in the sense that I put great emphasis on the domestic level variables and how those domestic level variables influence actors to act in the international system. And of course, I understand the greater picture of the system, which is polarity, etc. So I wanted to explain that and understand, for the audience to understand where I come from. I also come from a perspective that one cannot go around the world getting rid of illegitimate rulers, governments, whatever you want to call it, okay, based on an illegal action. And in terms of international law, that is a flagrant violation of sovereignty. And that is in international law, it creates a precedent. We have lived like that since 1648, after the Treaty of Westphalia, when the principle of sovereignty began to move. And now we just violated that principle. It is not the first time the United States does this. Well, It has done it in Panama. It has done it in Iraq, et cetera, et cetera. So it is. So that's basically my framework. Now, I want to remind the audience that this was an illegal action against to uproot, to extract, an illegitimate government. We all applaud when we see criminals being sent to jail. Not only international criminals, but national criminals that are still outside jail and should be in jail. Okay. All right. Now, having said that, I want to bring attention to the possible repercussions internationally. I mentioned the international law perspective. Once the United States creates this precedent, then who is going to tell the Russians, the Chinese, that they are incurring or they are violating international law? Okay, that's at a systemic level of analysis. That is at the level of great powers. But Russia, we all criticized what Russia did against poor Ukraine. Now, what are the high moral grounds the United States can stand on to argue that the Russian invasion, albeit the great difference in terms of lives and cost and time, is doing something illegal in terms of international law? The United States essentially has lost its high moral grounds in international law, and that is costly. That is an implication that we are not going to see tomorrow, but it's already happening in the world. Obviously, the Russians are more prompt to use international coercion. The Chinese are more subdued. The Chinese are holding back. The Chinese try to manipulate people or peoples in the world through economic means, okay? Because he mentioned something that is important. Who is going to tell any Latin American country that they should, do away with the Chinese investment there? It's a very costly environment. Okay? So it is not happening. And that's something that we have to think about. The precedent that this has done. Yes, they've done it before, but now we are in a different system. So that is the second concern that I have is that this precedent has implication for the system. Up until recently, perhaps up until 2008, 2009, we were in the so-called unipolar moment, where there was a single actor in the international system that was able to do things like going into to Somalia, to places, because they have no other things to do but to do that. However, we have grown in the global sense from just a single or a unipolar system to what I call a transition from multipolarity, multiple poles, to bipolarity. And now what I think is happening is that this precedent is, and what the Chinese are not doing is telling the United States the time of containment, the time of deterrence is over. And we need to be doing, and I think that what the United States is learning is that they just cannot be in the business of containing the Chinese in Latin America or in the Western Hemisphere, economically speaking. And so we have a dual process. In the Taiwan Strait, we have the Chinese being deterred by the United States from invading Taiwan. But given the United States invasion or intervention in the Western Hemisphere, who is going to stop the Chinese on moral legal grounds to not do that? Okay, so that's an inconsistency right there, especially if there is, which I doubt, a long-term policy of a state, what we call a grand strategy on the part of the United States. Okay, I think in this administration we are lost. Okay, no wonder there is the acronym TACKLE. Trump always chickens out. It's go back and forth, and you cannot do that in the security realm. You can do it in the economic realm. You can do it with the market, etc. But it's very, very dangerous for the international system to have an inconsistent individual that may be purposely sending signals to confuse the actors, but you just cannot maintain that level of that lack of transparency because they may miscalculate. And I am concerned that the Chinese, given what happened in Venezuela, may miscalculate in Taiwan because the United States is committed to protect the independence of Taiwan. But more importantly is to maintain the Japanese-American alliance alive. So I can continue making references, but it's important that we think not the issue in Venezuela, not in terms of the minute microscopic event in Venezuela, but we have to open up our lenses and think about how this affects the organization management of the international state system and what are the repercussions. For instance, the United States, given its position nowadays under the present administration, is basically trying to coerce its friends of 80 years. The best friends, the Europeans, are now supposedly the enemies of the United States, or not the very friendly, loyal friends that they used to be. Pushing the Canadians to go and get help and to establish close relations with China, that is a mistake. And all of these things, we can actually tease out what event happened in Venezuela and think about the global order. Think about what this may have about the polarity of the system. Again, I know that this presentation is about U.S. intervention and the international and economic dimensions. And I want to point out that the security dimension is fundamental for the survival of all of us in the international system. And I leave it at that. I take questions.
Thank you, Felix. Thank you very much. So it's my real pleasure to introduce Antonio Delgado. One of the smartest things I ever did in journalism was hire Antonio Delgado. Hands down. He's an award-winning journalist and reporter for El Nuevo Herald and the Miami Herald. He specializes in Venezuela. If you deeply care about the coverage of Venezuela, you have to read Tony Delgado. I was there when he broke the story that Hugo Chavez had cancer and he was dying. And I can go on the stories that he has broken about Venezuelan helping Gaddafi sell oil, which is another deep investigation he did. He's one of the most serious, objective, serious journalists I know. And so with me, it's a pleasure to introduce Tony.
Thank you, Manny. Thank you very much. He's a great boss, by the way. But the problem with being the third in line is that now I have about a third of the things that I wanted to say.
Don't worry about
it. But I wanted to give some context about this. You can argue about the questions about the legality of what happened January 3rd. You can question the motives. We don't really, it's not clear to me at least what the objective was. But if you ask a Venezuelan in Caracas if they agree with this, he'd probably say yes. I think 9 out of 10 people in Venezuela see this as a good thing, maybe not understanding the repercussions, what is going to happen, maybe overestimating its impact inside the country. But the fact is that for 20 years or more, Venezuela has been a downward spiral. The economy, 80% of the economy disappeared. When you have 20% of the population leaving the country, that's not an easy thing to achieve, and the Chavistas achieved that. So what happened in Venezuela was a tragedy. It's a country in ruins. It went from being one of the most wealthy Latin American countries to one of the poorest, with the standard of living that now is as bad or close to being as bad as Haiti, even while sitting on the largest oil reserves in the world. I mean, that's the dimension of this is staggering. Also, I've been covering Venezuela for 15 years, and I've been kind of trying to evaluate the chances of an organic regime change process developing in the country, and it was not going to happen. There wasn't within the military. And this was something that an objective the Trump administration had during the first administration to promote an internal coup, and it did not happen because the military did not have the muscle to get it done. So if you ever, well, I mean, it's really hard to talk in absolutes, but chances of getting Venezuelans to initiate the democratic transition on their own, it's close to nil in my eyes. I might be wrong on this, but I just don't, never, in the last few years, I never saw that happening. What happened earlier this month, it was remarkable. Hard to think something like this could happen, just 2 months prior. We covered all this process, all these negotiations going on between Delcy and the administration. So we kind of felt that Delcy was trying to get something going to get Maduro out of the way. But even so, I never saw this coming. But I don't even have an idea now that it did happen on what's going to happen with this. Because one thing is to get Maduro out of the way and get him to face charges in New York. Another is to dismantle the regime. And, there's a lot to do. One of the things that we're keeping an eye on right now at the paper, it's the who has controlled the military. Because even as we see Delcy Rodríguez trying to comply with what they're telling her to do out of Washington, she doesn't really have power of the military. Who has the power? It's Diosdado Cabello. And Diosdado Cabello is always been seen as the real godfather of the Cartel de los Soles. And for those, and there's a lot of people who doubt about the existence and of the cartel. I can tell you there is a cartel. They had been exporting between 350 and 500 tons of cocaine per year, coming out of Colombia. They went from the beginning being an organization that turned a blind eye to the operations to one that actually began controlling. And they were getting a lot of resources out of that. And that's why the regime was able to withstand the impact of the oil sanctions. It became one of the main sources of income to be able to wield and oil the grease of the military and keep their loyalty going. But it's really hard to see that coming to an end with the Chavistas still in power, and especially with Diosdado Cabello still there. So it's really hard to see how is that going to end. But, I'll be writing about it once it happens.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you very much. It's also a pleasure to introduce Edward Glab. We have a deep Texas connections and roots going back here. He's the lead for Global Energy Security Forum at FIU and professor at the Jack D. Gordon Institute for Public Policy. He has a background in international business, education, media, and government service. He was with ExxonMobil for more than 25 years and held a variety of positions in public affairs, including political risk, government, and community relations. So great to meet you, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I see everybody's still awake, which is nice. As I was preparing for this, and certainly this morning, listening to all the comments, and now this afternoon, what occurred to me was a Greek myth, Greek mythology about the 9-headed poisonous snake. that guarded the gates of hell. And every time you chop one head off, two more grew back in its place. Now, eventually, Hercules was able to kill the 9-headed poisonous Hydra. But what Trump has done has chopped off one head. All the other heads are still there, okay? The total corrupt, vicious, violator of human rights, all we heard this morning, all of that structure still exists in Venezuela. So the challenge remains enormous. What do they need to get out of this? Politically, I don't have an opinion on that. But I can talk about the oil business to give you some idea whether or not there's any hope to recover the 3 to 4 million barrels a day they used to produce. And if there is any possible hope of that, how long would it actually take to do it? I want to say there's no such thing as an oil curse. That's nonsense. It's a myth. When God was making the earth, he was putting all sorts of beautiful natural resources in Argentina, snow-capped mountains and streams and lagoons, and just fantastic. And the angel said, God, wait, you're putting everything in one place. And God said, aha, wait until you see the people I'm going to put there. This is Venezuela. It's not a curse. The oil was not a curse. If oil were a curse, the United States would not be where it is today. The United States produced more oil and gas in the world by the end of World War II than all the rest of the world combined. And what did it do? We created the biggest, most powerful economy in the world, the biggest military. We were a beacon of freedom and democracy. Everybody wanted to come and work in the United States. It's not a curse. It's a blessing if you know how to handle it. Look at Canada, same kinds of resources, the North Sea. Look at the Middle East. You want to ride a camel or drive a Bentley? They drive Bentleys today. So oil, it's all up to the people. It's the politics, it's the culture, it's the history. There are all kinds of factors, but you got to look in the mirror. You got to look in the mirror. If you've got that kind of oil, you got to say, how did we screw up and how are we going to fix this thing? Now, I'm going to turn strictly to oil now. Those are my more or less political opinions. And I just want to give you some idea. So I want to give you a contemporary story because you're probably a little more familiar with it, of Guyana, and also because Guyana is right next door to Venezuela, which Venezuela would like to claim. Now, you know that Exxon has been very successful in producing now about 1 million barrels a day of oil from Guyana. But can any of you guess, would anyone like to take a guess in what year Exxon started negotiations to explore and produce oil in Guyana? Any
20
guess?
years ago? 80 years ago.
They started in 1999. They got the acreage in 1999, 98, 99. They then, in 2008, began oil and gas exploration. In 2015, they made their first discovery, and it wasn't until December 2019 that they actually began producing oil. Now, that's 20 years. How does this apply to Venezuela? It's going to take 20 years for Venezuela to get back to where it was. It's going to take billions upon billions upon billions of dollars if they can ever do it. Now, where is this money going to come from? Is the U.S. government going to give the money to Venezuela? I don't think so. Is Venezuela providing, selling enough oil today to finance it itself? I don't think so. So how are they going to achieve restoring the oil fields of Venezuela? Now, Trump seems to feel that the oil companies just jump in there and willy-nilly give them all the money that they need. That's crazy. Exxon, for example, has been nationalized, expropriated is a better term, twice. They're owed $1.8 billion. And Trump has said, oh, that's the past. Not going to pay any attention to that. We got to look forward. Well, Exxon doesn't like that very much. And neither does ConocoPhillips, which was also built out of another $1 billion. So who is going to jump into Venezuela and commit billions of dollars when it's going to take you 20 or 25 or 30 years to recover that investment. You'd have to be nuts to do that. And let me tell you where I'm coming from. I spent 25 years doing political risk for Exxon Corporation all over the world, in Africa, in Asia, Caspian Sea, Russia, you name it. I was there doing political risk. And I know how oil companies calculate where they're going to invest. And it's all about return on capital employed and level of risk. The higher the risk, you got to have a higher return or the company's not going to go in there. The lower the risk, the more they're willing to accept a lower profit on the investment. I worked on a project in Chad, in Africa. They started this in 1988. And that project, they recently sold it about after 25 years for $430 million after investing $3.7 billion in the project. There was no profit there. It was a high-risk project. There were certain technical problems and political problems. When I went there to do my first political risk, the French Foreign Legion was responsible for Chad, right? It was a colony of the French for many years. And the only reason there was a field hospital, the only reason there was some stability there during the days that I was examining this project was because of the French. So, the oil business is long-term. The oil business is you're looking at decades in order to invest and get a return on capital. And I just want you to all ask yourself, if you had $10 billion, which of you would put that money in Venezuela right now? Would any of you put that money? I certainly wouldn't. I wouldn't put a penny in Venezuela. So in reality, I don't think there's much hope at all that the oil companies are going to step up and say, sure, Donald, we got billions here. We're going to toss it into Venezuela and help the country to recover. The other thing Donald is doing, which is just incredibly stupid, he's saying he wants the oil companies to cooperate in lowering oil prices. Guys, no. That's not what oil companies are after. They're not going to pour billions of dollars into a country because they want to lower oil prices. Right now, there is far more production in the world than there is demand. That's one of the reasons prices right now are fluctuating about around $60 a barrel. And there's also something in the oil business right now that we call surplus capacity. What does that mean? That means if the Arabs wanted to turn a spigot tomorrow, they could increase on a daily basis hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil. And other countries around the world, we could do it in the States. As you know, we're the biggest oil and gas producer in the world right now, far and away. 3 countries produce close to 40% of the world's oil right now: Saudi Arabia, United States, and Russia. So we've got awash in oil. So how are we going to go into Venezuela and toss more oil on the market, which would force prices down? If I'm responsible for a company and for shareholder return on investment, I ain't going to do it. So my prediction is it's going to be a long haul for Venezuela to get back to where it used to be. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Well, there's a common thread that I've heard from the 4 interviews. Like, we've gone in there, we've removed one guy, but the trouble and the problem's still there. In fact, we've created an even bigger hornet's nest and of instability, opportunities for other opportunistic nations to act on that. And so I wanted to ask you all, and feel free to answer this. I happen to run into talking to a couple of members of Congress, and it reminds me of the Willie Chirino song, and I don't say this cynically, Ya viene llegando, of the fall. And these individuals said to me, well, Venezuela, this was literally right before Maduro was removed, but the discussion was, oh, Maria Corina is going to go in there. She's going to lead, and we've seen it hasn't happened. But the way it was described to me, it seemed very Pollyannish or cynical. It was like Venezuela today, then Cuba, and then Nicaragua. And it's so I want you all to just weigh in, because it's part of our panel here is how is that, I'm feeling like I've got this all over the place, because I'm thinking, okay, then this country's going to go, this one's going to go, this one's going to go. I happen to be talking to a DEA agent who told me, says, for what we're doing, if we were going to go and do anything, we would be doing it in Mexico, because they're the ones with the biggest supplying of drugs. And actually now what? They're a big provider of oil to Venezuela, or Cuba, I should say, Cuba. And so there seems to be this mixed message that's all over the place and incongruent with the realities of how things are going to work out.
Domino theory about one country falling ahead.
So,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll pass it on, then
just
I'll
a
go to
quick comment.
There's just a.
Yeah, I think as that's saying that we're back to the idea that domino theory works. Every country has a unique circumstance, right? Cuba is different from Venezuela and Nicaragua, and so the conditions for change in each are different. But there is a kind of, and I've said this to some of you, there is a kind of, and I understand it, there's a kind of triumphalism, right? That the removal is a sense, well, then next is transition and democracy. And then, of course, Cuba, because Cuba will not have oil, and Cuba's in a just horrendous situation. And then, and so I think we as academics, analysts, even those in policy, have an obligation to try to look at these things as rational, objective as possible, and not get caught up in the enthusiasm and the buzz that comes as a result of what we saw on the 3rd of January. I would love nothing more than for the domino theory to work, not today or tomorrow, decades ago, right? But I have to look at it as an academic, and when the opportunities I had in policy to tell my bosses, rationally, these are the conditions that are required for change. I'm not sure those conditions are there. So we have to think about other options. But yeah, I've heard the same thing, George. It's a sense of, okay, here it goes, here we go. And I think it raises expectations, and it could lead to disappointment.
And you should know, it was presented to me that simplistic. It's like once Maduro's out of there, it's just a matter of time before Cuba goes. But nothing quite works like that. But anyway, anyone else want to go ahead and, Felix, appreciate it?
Well, I don't subscribe to the theory of domino theory either, but what we are facing in countries like Cuba and where Venezuela is today. I know Venezuela since early 90s, fantastic country, very, bright people there. That's what they're populating, like many countries in Latin America. But I want to remind people that I am very skeptical also of economic statecraft. The idea that putting economic pressure on countries, you're going to create a transition. And while they may increase the cost of running a country, these individuals who are bent on controlling the country through coercion, they care very little about what the masses do and feel and suffer. They will remain in power. Cuba, I wish that I could have a magic wand and dispose of that regime, not now, but many years ago when I had to live there as an adolescent. But I am, at the moment, I don't think that no matter how difficult the economic situation is for the people, it's not going to change the desire and the drive of the leadership or the elite that is running the country, because they have no place in the world to be. Okay, this is not this Arabian South, crown prince that can be, recycled after committing that heinous crime. Okay, and killing and pulverizing a journalist in Turkey that he's received in the White House, and because he has the money. In Cuba, there is absolutely nothing to exploit except for the beauty of the countryside and the beaches, but there is very little natural resources to live on. And frankly, the population continues to suffer. And I find my, countrymen asking, this time they just touched bottom. People cannot continue resisting what they are enduring today. Well, they will adjust, unfortunately. They will adjust because if anything goes right, if anything is going well in Cuba, it is the security apparatus. Except maybe one day one will say the emperor is naked, and then everything will crumble down. But to bring Cuba out of the ashes, it will take a lot. Venezuela has a natural resource that Cuba don't have. And despite the fact my colleague, Dr. Glab says, at least there is hope. Perhaps not, it may not be suitable to get a return on investment in 20 years, but it could be in 30 or 40 years. And that I would like to hear more about what is the return on investment 30 years down the road.
I'm happy to comment a little more to clarify what I said earlier about the cost. The estimates I've heard, which I think are too low, is for the oil business in Venezuela to return to 3.5 million barrels a day is going to take $100 billion, $10 billion a year for 10 years. I think that's on the low side. Why do I say that? If you look at Guyana, okay, it was $60 billion to bring in that project, $60 billion, okay? So, and if you compare that to Venezuela, it's going to be far more than that. It could be as much as 200 billion. So we don't know until the oil companies get in there and start examining the fields. We don't know really how long it's going to take or how much money is going to be required. And it's not just physical equipment. You can't just think about pipelines. You got to think about the reservoirs. Okay, if you don't manage a reservoir correctly, if it has been damaged through mismanagement, you're not going to be able to get a lot of that oil out. It's gone. It's been wasted. It's locked in. And we don't know how much damage has been done to the oil fields in Venezuela, the oil that's still in the ground. It's also very expensive to produce because it doesn't flow. It's a heavy molasses. It's called sour crude because it has a lot of sulfur. It's very waxy. It costs more money to process it. And right now, a barrel of Venezuelan crude, more or less $35, $40 a barrel. That's nothing. That's nothing. Nobody's going to produce oil at that price point because you can't make money on it. So there's a long way to go before you can hope that Venezuela begins producing enough oil so they can start reinvesting and recovering from the last 2 decades. Second thing about prices, keep something in mind here. $50 a barrel oil is something no oil producing nation wants. They don't want it in the US, they don't want it in Saudi Arabia, they don't want it in the North Sea. Why? Because that oil income, particularly in Saudi Arabia, in order to cover their budget every year, the Arabs need an oil price of $100 a barrel to cover their budget. Otherwise, they're going to be running a deficit. And if you go down the list of oil-producing countries, you look at Iran, look at Iraq, look at all of them, you're going to see the charts will show you at this price point, they're going to run a deficit of this amount of dollars. So this idea of $50 a barrel doesn't really appeal to anyone.
Go ahead, Tony, because I was going to ask another question, but you want to weigh in on this? Go ahead.
I wanted to ask you actually, how about Chevron? They're already in Venezuela, and quite a bit's been written about Harry Sargent, the Florida tycoon who has also oil investments in Venezuela. They've been keen about lobbying the administration to get them to make peace with the Venezuelan regime for them to be able to increase production. Do you see them actually?
What Chevron has said, they think over the next 2 years, they currently produce somewhere in the neighborhood, if I recall correctly, about 125,000 barrels a day. they said over the next 2 years, maybe they could increase that by about 50%. Okay. That's still minuscule. It's at Venezuela right now is only not even producing 1 million barrels a day. 100 million barrels a day are traded of oil around the world. So Venezuela is less than 1% of that, insignificant. And I know Chevron, I've done some consulting with Chevron, and but actually not on Venezuela, on Ecuador and problems they had there. But basically, I know Chevron has been getting their license renewed every year, refused to leave for quite a few years, and they've continued to produce oil. Now, how much has Chevron actually put into Venezuela in new money? That's the question. And how much are they willing to risk putting more in to bring Venezuela back up to its previous producing point? I can give you some examples how maybe that might be possible to get oil companies to do this, but it would take me too long to explain it. And I know you guys want to hear from other people and talk about other things.
Yeah, I had Tony and I had dinner not too long ago with another Venezuelan journalist, Teresa Fontado, and one of the things that we were talking about is if Maduro was removed, that how it would destabilize. Now we're talking about international dimensions, but still it's about the risk inside the country, but how he was propped up by cartels, the military and others, and how it would create this, in essence, destabilization of civil society, even worse than it is. So can you talk about what some of your reporting has showed now that he's gone? Is anything that you warned about come to fruition?
Well, I think everybody at this point is kind of waiting and seeing. We're just kind of waiting to see what happens. But the fact is that inside Venezuela, you have different irregular groups that could actually launch the country into a civil war just because there are irregular groups involved in drug trafficking and other criminal activities. And one of the what made the possibility of a transition a very risky and difficult plan to execute would be that you don't have a solid military that could actually pacify the country. And that even applies to a transition headed by the U.S. Even if the U.S. sent troops to Venezuela, you have the risk of having a situation like we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan, where you could have regular combats, and it's just going to be very difficult to pacify groups such as the ELN that has hundreds, if not thousands, of irregular soldiers in a number of Venezuelan states, and basically they're the law in some of these areas. And then you have the colectivos, which are the paramilitary bands that are controlled directly by Diosdado Cabello. So if you went and attempted to capture Cabello and did not happen in a few hours like it happened with Maduro, you could have violence and clashes with some of these groups. And there's a military, which again, through years of control and domination, they're not institutionalized. They don't defend the Constitution. They defend the leaders of the regime, who are involved in illegal activities. So it's a very complicated situation. As a Venezuelan, I would have liked to see a situation where Maduro was removed, and then you would have Maria Corina Machado as the recognized leader of the opposition, and the democratic forces being able to be involved in the transition. But the truth is that she does not have control of the military. She doesn't have any control inside the nation. So in a sense, even though it's a mess what's going on, and again, there are questions as to the legality and the objectives that are being sought here. The fact that the U.S. did not take Maduro and called Maria Corina and told her, look, here's the country, take it over. They basically did her a favor because that would have been a mess.
Okay. I wanted to ask with Frank more so, what's from your position, what's the mood like in Latin America? How is this being seen? And from having spent time reporting there too, it's always been like, here comes the U.S. trying to tell us what to do here. But how has this been? Has this been different? What's happened in Venezuela? How it's been seen and received in Latin America?
Yeah, important question, George. I want to take your question and sort of add something to it.
Okay.
I think what we saw in Venezuela, what we've seen, I think the international community has some responsibility. Just an anecdote, when July of 2024 election was held, and it was clearly stolen, and the evidence was clear that El Mundo had won 70% or so of the vote. The United States, we at the OAS, were really pushing the member states at the OAS to take an opportunity here to really try to isolate and put as much international diplomatic pressure, other pressure, on the regime. This was like a window that we had. We had an election. It was a legitimate election in which El Mundo won that was clearly stolen grotesquely by Maduro. And there was an opportunity there to prevent what we saw January 3rd. And unfortunately, despite efforts we did and others to get the Brazilians, to get the Mexicans, to get the Colombians to really jump on board and take advantage of this moment to push out an illegitimate government, they decided to play the sovereignty game. No, this was something internal. We can't get involved, right? And the Maduro regime, in a sense, was saying, they're not waving our flag, but in a sense, they're complicit in our authoritarianism. And I think all that's been building up and built up to where we are today. So I put a lot of responsibility on members of the international community when at specific moments in the tragedy of that country, more could have been done beyond the United States to move that country in a better direction. To answer your question more directly, what's interesting is that the reaction has been mixed, George. Go back to Panama. What's interesting is that when Noriega was removed, the reaction of the international community, although they were all happy to see Noriega gone, was pretty strong against the United States invasion. People seem to forget that. I mean, there was almost unanimity in the Permanent Council of the OAS in its opposition to the United States. Here, not so much, right? Everyone was just thrilled to see that guy in some jail in New York City. And no one's going to go out and say anything negative about something that they all wanted to see. So that's one thing that is, the region is polarized, George. And there are those who are more aligned with the Trump administration than others. So you saw the Mexicans, the Brazilians, and the Colombians react and be critical of this. There's others that were really enthusiastic and supportive, like Argentina, El Salvador, and Ecuador, just to name a few. And then the rest of the region was silent. Why? They don't want to get on the bad side of Donald Trump, right? Because they can come with some economic sanctions, some tariff, etc. So people are sort of waiting to see how this plays off. I think that the reaction or the repercussions of what we saw, we're not going to see it now, but depending on how the situation goes in Venezuela, in the long term, people will look back and say, and we'll start to hear the same rhetoric that we've heard in the past about anti-imperialism and all this stuff. But for now, these three camps, if you will, silence, a few opposed, and others who are supportive of what the United States did for now.
Alex, you want to weigh in?
What I can only add, but actually raise a question is, why is the international community acting with so much caution and reverence and silence towards President Trump and his administration? And I don't have inside information. I don't know anybody working for him or with him. But I like to venture a little bit of an educated speculation. And while we see, academics see that his foreign policy is very erratic, unpredictable, okay, we also see that he says something like unthinkable 2-3 years ago, making Canada one of his enemies, alienating the Europeans, getting close even to an oligarch, because there is no more communism. Here in Miami, some people write to me, oh, tienen filo comunista. It's like, what am I saying? Where are they still living in 1980, 1975? Filo comunista. They have a communist age. Anyway, so that's, it is sending a mixed message. But I think that what we saw in Venezuela, and I wish that Mr. Rubio would be here and one of his colleagues to answer the question, is that I see the body language when Marco Rubio is in public with them. There is discomfort. It's like that man doesn't feel like he's sitting on something that he's not feeling well. It's not hemorrhoids. It's just that he doesn't fit with the crowd. Okay. And frankly, I think that the U.S. foreign policy at the moment is bicephalous. Okay. Bicephalous. It has two brains.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And on the one hand, you have, Trump loyalists, thinking one way, but they also have another individual, the academic, civilized face in Marco Rubio. And he is, they have to give him some crumbs. Okay. He made his political career about, Cuba, because obviously, our background at home basically moderates with how we think in the future. So he kept, he grew up thinking about liberating Cuba. And what better, trophy could he get if he actually promotes the downfall of the Cuban regime? Then he also got into the Venezuelan, and there is a large community here. Is how do I get along with the Venezuelans? Frankly, I think that the Trump administration, or Trump and his intimate cronies, as I call them, actually agreed to do something about it. But this is what I call, and John Mearsheimer calls, a pinprick operation. That's all we're going to get from that. They move. This is the most expensive police activity in the world, moving assets that should not be in the Caribbean. Okay, assets that should be in the Mediterranean or someplace else, but here in the Caribbean, they spend about 4 months in vacation just to send a signal that we are serious about sending something there. And I think that this plan that Marco Rubio has mentioned, there is a 3-step plan, remains to be seen, because he needs the support of everybody else, but at least he got something done. And I think that that's why we see a very erratic, talking about the cost of extracting oil from Venezuela. Think about extracting rare minerals from the frozen, places in Greenland. Think, making an argument that, they're getting there, the minerals, the gas, all of these things are in the most inhospitable place. I'm sorry?
pollution.
Pollution,
It releases methane into the air.
Yeah.
Methane is trapped
Yeah.
in the frozen tundra.
I know.
You
Well,
stop drilling, it goes up.
you are the expert. I don't know about that, but I just
But that's what I'm telling you. It's much more powerful as a greenhouse gas. So how are you going to capture that so it doesn't go up the atmosphere? This whole idea of going to Siberia and drilling in the ground to extract things, you're going to release all that methane into the air. More methane than oil was released into the air in the BP spill in the Gulf of Mexico 10 years ago. It's one of those things that has slipped under the radar for most people. CH4.
But that's actually proof that we have a very erratic foreign policy.
Yeah.
I don't, I don't know. I think that this, this is a man that actually takes pride in announcing in the morning a news that something happened. Nobody is able. There is no proper channels to communicate to the public that something was done. No, it has to be him in truth social, whatever. And this is a megalomaniac individual. He's a narcissist, and therefore he wants to be in center stage. And so going back to my speculation is that I think that whatever is happening in the world through Trump, he claims that he's been in different places. Netanyahu had to convince him to actually drop those bombs in Iran. Okay. In addition, the operation that we saw in Venezuela, we have to remember, he made the decision. His cronies agree with that. He gave Marco Rubio something to brag about him. But then, how do you do the operation? It is in the hands of the military. And yet, despite the purges that the new president, Secretary of War, as they call him now, is going to cost 125 million. These are individual career militaries. And they could tell him, yes, you want to do this? We know how to do it. And this is costly, okay? And now, they also have in mind what happened in Iraq, okay? When they decided to, invaded Iraq, destroyed the Ba'ath Party, it destroyed the police department, the military, and that what did we get in return? A lawless, anarchical Iraq that cost a lot of money to the Americans and a lot of lives as well. And they have to leave at the end. Do they want to do that in Venezuela? I'm not clear.
Yeah. Well, we want to leave time for questions from you all if you have. And also, I don't know if there's, from the last panel, if there's questions that came in from our audience online, but at least whoever's got a question, just what you do. Raise your hand, and so we know, can you identify yourself? And
hello, humbled to be breaking the ice on this session. My name is Anthony Amador. I'm a master's student in LAC, Latin American and Caribbean Studies program. I wanted to maybe hone in on two themes which have been kind of unifying a lot of the discussions here. One of them is like the perennial debate around oil, the future of Venezuela. So I wanted to ask for some of the other panelists to maybe comment specifically on, is there a resource curse here? Because we look at Latin America, ExxonMobil and other companies have been expropriated, but not just because Latin American governments and people woke up one day and decided to do it. There was motivating factors for it, and there was intense political and historic processes behind that. So I want to ask, is there a resource curse? And second, is there a misunderstanding on America's relationship to authoritarian governments or democratic backsliding in Latin America? Because at the same time that this is happening, we're supposedly bringing forward a new moment for democracy in Venezuela and Cuba, Nicaragua. Let's remember, dominoes are not played standing up, so that theory may not play out. But we're also getting closer to governments that are going towards more authoritarian forms of rule and having that same kind of process in our own country. So I want to ask, how do all these dynamics play into the kind of reconfigurations in the Western Hemisphere and the resource curse?
Not quite sure what the question is.
I can summarize it real quick.
It was a long statement, and then there's,
I'm not sure. What question are you asking about? Oil?
Use the microphone because people are online.
Give him the
He's
microphone.
gonna re-ask the question. He needs to use a microphone.
Two sentences. One, for the other panelists, because you already said, yes, there is no resource curse. Is there a resource curse which is dooming Venezuela towards authoritarianism, towards, in this case, foreign interventionism, as seen in other parts of the world? You take the Saudis. I'll say another example, Iran. Second question, do we care about democracy in Latin America, or is this about something else? Because at the same time that we're taking down Maduro, we're getting closer to other forms of authoritarian government in the region and in our country.
You're asking what is the background and reasoning for oil expropriation and nationalization in Latin America in the past? Is that part of your question? I mean, why did Mexico nationalize oil? Why did Peru, the IPC company, nationalize in 68? Why did Venezuela in 76? I mean, there's lots of different reasons for that. There is a book by Paul Sigmund, published quite a few years ago, where he actually goes into and examines why companies have been nationalized. There's also a very good book, I can't remember the author, on copper in Chile, and the whole history of why the company stepped in and nationalized those mines. So in terms of nationalization, expropriation, there is a lot of literature out there about the background and reason that that sort of thing took place.
I think, Anthony, as Ed was saying, I don't think the resource curse is inevitable, but the evidence shows that it does contribute and lead to authoritarianism. I think Norway, the United States, and Canada are exceptions to the rule. But I'm more interested in your second question. You know, after the end of the Cold War, there was a true bipartisan consensus in the United States in support of democracy, human rights, the rule of law, and anti-corruption. That was, you know, implemented, but that was a commitment that the United States made as a matter of U.S. policy at multilaterals, et cetera. That's over, right? If you look at the national security document of the Trump administration, there is absolutely no mention of democracy or human rights or the rule of law. Zero, right? And so this is not going to be a priority, nor anti-corruption will be a priority. So in a sense, the authoritarians in the world and in this part of the world feel that the president has their backs, or at least will not be critical of them when they engage or in deepening their authoritarianism, right? And they very much identify with this administration. And so in countries now that are still maybe governed by weak democracies, if those democracies fall into authoritarianism, the authoritarian instigators in those countries will feel that the Inter-American Democratic Charter, that the OAS, and that the United States will not get in the way of their attempts to overthrow a democratic government. And what we've seen throughout the region, including in the United States, is that corrupt leaders are getting pardoned, are being taken off the OFAC list, as in the case of, well, in the case of Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former president of Honduras, was pardoned. Horacio Cartes in Paraguay, who was on the OFAC list for all kinds of corruptions, was removed from the list, et cetera. And we've seen in the United States. So we're really entering a kind of Darwinian world in which authoritarian leaders are more respected than the weak democracies of Europe who were seen as ending civilization, which is what the national security doctrine says.
If I want to add, when you said, are we interested in democracy in Latin America? I gather that you meant the United States, because we are all committed to democracy in Latin America, I'm sure. But I think that one of the implications of the intervention there is that the United States has lost the high moral ground in terms of promoting the world, the international liberal order that remained in the world since 1946. That liberal international order rested on several pillars. One was a security matter, okay? It was a definitive enemy or opponent. that's the reason that it led to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, an organization or an alliance that remain way beyond its geostrategic interest. Okay. Second, it rested on an economic system that was in the Bretton Woods system that was created. Okay, it had a financial and a financial monetary component, and all the organizations, the World Bank, the IMF, etc. And then it has a third leg, and that is the international political system. And the idea was to promote democracy, to create democracies. What we are witnessing here, because of the actions that this president is taking and the erratic course that it takes, okay, is eroding, am I pronouncing that correct? Eroding the basic fabric of that liberal international world order, okay? And when that happens, and you see the level of transactions going on, as my friend and colleague Mora pointed out, where basically people who were serving a jail sentence of 30 years for the very same crimes, the Maduro is going to face justice in a couple of months or a year or 2 years, I don't know. You know, he's pardoned. And then other people that happen. And we see this happening again. So this is an abandonment of those very principles that are democratic and this is an attack on the constitutional process in this country and in the world. And that is not going to lead to democracy because I fear for the democracy in this country.
Thank you, Felix. So, there's 3 questions here. So 4. Oh. Okay, we'll go to you, and then we'll come over here, and then we'll go to you. I'm sorry.
My name is Chris. I'm a Malik student. I have a specific question for Dr. Martin, and then a more general question for the panel. So specifically for Dr. Martin, we've heard a lot of criticisms of recent foreign policy actions, specifically concerns regarding, early on you mentioned relationships with European powers that are now falling apart. However, we do know that people have been imprisoned in the United Kingdom for things that they've said, which seems similar or at least comparable to things that have happened in Venezuela, as well as other European countries, including Ukraine. I know you mentioned poor little Ukraine. My question to you is, do you support the national security strategy as it's laid out or not? That's actually probably a better general question for the panel is, do you support the national security strategy as it's been laid out? Because regardless of what you think of what just happened with the Venezuelan strike, it's safe to say that it pretty much falls in line with the national security strategy.
President Trump administration national security strategy.
I'm guessing the answer is no.
Well, I wish that I was the one designing the national security strategy of the United States, because something that has worked for 80 years is basically being dismantled, okay, because it was too costly for the United States. You know, the claiming that the European powers were not meeting the minimum 2% investment into security. You know, the United States, whether we like it or not, I am going to use a label, but I don't mean that I associate myself. It is a hegemon. It is a leader in the Western Hemisphere, in the world, and that the United States committed itself to be a leader of that world order. You know, norm-based order that remained in power for such a long time. And it was able to galvanize the people. Yes, there are free riders. You know, it happens. You know, in an alliance, there are often free riders, people that want to be, the Europeans and most of the world lived under something that is deterrence 2. There are deterrence 1, which is the protection of the homeland. Okay, and then there is deterrence 2, which is the projection of that deterrence worldwide, and that worked. Now what we're seeing is that the cost of promoting that national security policy is too expensive. So supposedly he was drawing the Europeans to spend more money. Some of them are, but then the savings for the United States was going to be invested at home, dealing with the problems at home. Well, guess what? What I find is this administration is investing in promoting more problems internally and not solving any. Okay, so yes, I would support the old-fashioned national security strategy of the United States. I support, for instance, the United States pivoting more towards the Chinese threat over there. But that's thinking as a great power. I don't know how to connect that to the Venezuelan issue, if I may.
Thank you.
Mentioned that assets should not be here, but rather in the Mediterranean.
I'm sorry, I don't hear you well because I have issues with my profile.
And then we'll go over here when.
You had mentioned that assets should be in the Mediterranean rather than here, just as an example. Can you explain why concerns in other parts of the world would be more pertinent to the American people than in our southern neighbors, with our southern neighbors, if that's the intention?
Go ahead and give him and then you can, yeah, we'll come back. You guys.
Thank you, gentlemen. My question sort of has a cynical twist to it, because I strongly believe, and this is my own belief, that this whole situation in Venezuela is being driven by hubris, whether it's a question of putting a feather in Rubio's cap, or if it's a question of Trump's legacy. I'm just curious as to whether any of you believe that Trump is applying Putin's model of expansionism of Russia into the West, whether it be, the West, whether it be Ukraine or the Baltic states or Poland, whether or not he's using that as a model as far as like, well, if Putin is going to have his sphere of influence, I should have mine. And it's kind of dovetails upon what you had said before, which is a very interesting interpretation, or it's a perverse interpretation of the Monroe Doctrine, because there it was trying to keep external influences out, and here he's using it, that term, but it's really hegemony, and he's trying to impose might makes right on our neighbors. So I'm just curious whether or not you think that Putin has had some influence on Trump's policies in trying to intervene in Venezuela as a purpose of imposing a sphere of influence on it.
Let me give him the mic.
Sorry, is that funny?
And then we'll go to you,
Only,
and then you.
only to
and we'll back over
the
here.
extent that I think Trump thinks of himself and Putin and has an attraction to the idea of strongmen, right? Just being tough or seeming to be tough, when in fact it could be hiding insecurities and other things. So the national security doctrine, just to also piggyback on that, marks the end of an era, the era that my colleague was talking about. It's the end of the neoliberal order. I was listening to Secretary Letnick talk at the Davos meeting, be critical of globalization. No one has benefited more from globalization than the United States, and maybe China later on, yes. The United States. We benefited by the economic rules that established, by the alliances that established. We dominated globalization, and now that system is under attack by the country that benefited the most. I recommend to all the students, to everybody, because I think it's a groundbreaking speech. Read carefully the Canadian Prime Minister's speech at Davos. I have read it 3 times because it lays out, and not legalese or political talk, it's just the clarity of that speech describes the world we had and the world we are in now, and doesn't call it a transition. He calls it a rupture. And I say rupture, I don't know if he meant it that way, but systems, as Felix knows, when there is really not a transition, but a rupture, ruptures are chaotic. They are uncertain, right? And that can lead to more conflict. And the United States, rather than expanding its power, it is lessening its power. It is saying, I don't want to be involved in Europe. I don't want to be involved in Asia, much less in Africa. I only want to be involved in the Western Hemisphere. So we're isolating ourselves. Nos estamos achicando, as we would say in Spanish. We are reducing ourselves. Not because Frank Morris says, it's in the document that they published.
That's an amazing speech. If you haven't read it, you got to find it and you got to listen to it because it will really give you an orientation and respond to a lot of comments and questions.
Let's go here.
Trump's reaction was very telling.
Oh, yeah, he hated it. Oh, my God. The Canadian is now the enemy of the ground.
Up the week.
And de-invited, I think, from that peace organization, what he's putting together too.
Oh, yeah.
Peace Corps, yeah. Canadian, yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I was hearing that the US was actually not imposing the moral order that it was established in 1946. I heard I don't know, I remember his Dr. Martin said it, but how is this even possible if the United States has been, for example, intervening in a lot of countries, especially what happened in Chile when, for example, Manuel Contreras, which was the director of the DINA, had direct connections with the CIA. Also, the two interventions in Panama in 1989 and 1903 with the United Fruit Company. How is that even imposing a moral order if you are imposing your moral orders to others? That's not, for me, moral order. And my other question is how this for you guys is similar to what happened with Nixon administration and Kissinger, knowing that Marco Rubio is having a lot of power and he has the potential to do a transition in a foreign country. Thank you very much.
Well, when I say the higher moral ground, believe me, I know that the United States has intervened in multiple countries throughout the history, okay? Because one of the key pillars in United States foreign policy, even when the United States was an isolationist, truly isolationist country, it was to somehow intervene in places where its security issues were at stake, in security question. So, but I think that in the present system where, we have evolved from the 19th century to the present. And while we have intervened, well, I like to think that we have evolved. And when I say we is the world, I am not talking about the US, but we have evolved. And yes, there have been instances like Panama, Guyana in 1982. We have multiple interventions in the Dominican Republic, in Nicaragua, in Cuba, okay? And of course, in 1973, the coup d'etat in Chile, September 11th, 1973, was orchestrated by no other than Henry Kissinger and his cronies. So therefore, but at the time, there was a greater commitment to,
You want to weigh in on that?
pillars that held together the global order, okay? You cannot have a global order and not have imperfections, okay? But I think that in the midst that we are living now, he refers to as a break of the system, and doing this kind of thing is sending, the wrong signals to the rest of the world, and it's actually weakening the appeal that the United States once enjoyed among the Club of Nations from a high moral ground. I am not condoning that the other interventions were okay. I am not suggesting the other interventions were okay, were acceptable, but this particular intervention happens at a juncture in time when it's very dangerous.
Just suggest that what he's saying, that this higher moral order, it was an aspiration. It's never been a reality. What you point out is absolutely true, but it's our ideal. All men are created equal. We know that's bullshit in the United States, okay? But it's our aspiration. It's the shining castle on the hill. We're all, I know one day you'll get to the promised land, Martin Luther King. I won't be here to go get with you. It's a promise. It's an aspiration. That's what we want to be, okay? You don't want to be a sinner, but I bet you sinned a lot of times.
Just very well said. So one thing, we're going to go here and then we're running. So if we can just keep our questions tight and then tight answers. So the gentleman's been waiting very patiently there.
Well, first, thank you very much for the very interesting presentation, this panel. I'm part of these people that got put in the Argentine paradise. And I'm here as a postdoctoral associate. Yes, but you are absolutely right. I mean, you just need to see the news today. And you're right. I'm a postdoctoral associate here in international relations. I'm a bit pessimistic about this situation. Probably I'm dancing with the sound of the music because realism seems to be like the music we need to play in this new era that we are living. And I really do not believe that this will lead to a political, regime change or democracy. I really don't think that there is economic recovery coming. And I do not believe the excuse of narco-terrorism and narco-traffic, or because we all know, I mean, I study a little bit or a lot international crime, and we know that if we take one person, I mean, the second name of these criminal groups is adaptation. So this is not the solution for that. So my question is why? And I think it's partially answered that I was thinking of the Greek term hubris. Oh, it's just we are in the hand of a couple of guys who want to show that they are powerful enough just to, I don't know what. Next to it, and also it was introduced, what do you think will be the role of middle powers in this new scenario? No, you mentioned Canada. I'm thinking of Australia. I'm thinking of also some third world countries like, yes, Argentina, Brazil, that might, I don't know if they fit the definition of middle power, but they are powerful enough just to say something. I don't know. And my third point, and this is why I introduced myself as coming from Argentina, I was born in a dictatorship. I was born during a dictatorship. A dictatorship that collapsed because civil society inside Argentina and a civil society outside of Argentina struggled to make this happen. My question is, what do you think about the 7.9 million of Venezuelans who are outside the country, of this Venezuelan diaspora, and what role might they have in order to really make a change in the country?
So we're running out of time, so we'll collect the last question very quick, and then give it a round. Okay, so because it's we're out of time now.
Are we closing the doors? Opening the door?
Yeah. No, I'm gonna try to talk about it.
Super fast. One thing I just want to put out there is nobody has said that Trump just doesn't care. Everything is personal, everything is ego, everything is PR, right? And this has been the perfect PR stunt for him. My question is for Tony. What about gold? What about gold? I thank Ed for commenting on oil, and it doesn't make sense, and everybody is talking about oil. But I want to hear from Tony if you have anything to say about gold and the importance of gold for Trump's own personal wealth and lining his pockets and the pockets of his cronies. Thank you.
Mr. Glenn, going back to the solution in Venezuela and the possibility you brought up, but you didn't want to talk about, which is the possibility that the Venezuelan or the oil companies from outside Venezuela could get to 3 million barrels per day. You were going to talk about it, and you said, well, there's a chance. I would love to hear.
You're talking to the microphone. No, hold on. Tony, answer gold. Gold, Tony. No, you can.
About gold. The regime has been smuggling gold for years, and they've been doing it to launder money. They spend their principal, one of the main mechanisms they have been employing. I understand that during the negotiations held last year in Qatar, Delcy was offering the administration, will give you concessions for mineral, gold, including Trump, yes. Now, I don't know if this was to Trump personally, but they were offering a large package of possibility of getting involved in minerals, getting involved in oil, getting involved in all sorts of things. And they were telling Trump, you choose who is going to get into those areas in Venezuela. Now, I understand that was offered. I don't know if that's what it's driving the administration today, or what drove the administration to go into Venezuela and capture Maduro. But a lot of the things that we reported about those negotiations apparently are taking place at this time.
And do you know who he assigned to be in charge of gold?
No.
Somebody who started with Jared, maybe?
Oh, we don't.
Maybe?
No.
It's hot. Everybody from the United Arab Emirates, maybe?
I can say that it was offered. I cannot say if it was accepted. I cannot say if that's actually what's going on. And going about the diaspora, I think most Venezuelans that left the country want to come back, wish to come back. Venezuelans have, for the longest time, we have not been migrating people. We would travel, come to the U.S., and then we return home because we used to like it there. But the new reality is that the country collapsed. It's not only that the economy, became nothing, but there was a lot of violence, persecution, and one of the things I would mention, though, in regards to what you were talking about, comparing the Venezuelan dictatorship to the Argentinian dictatorship, is that what is in Venezuela is another different animal. The Argentinian dictatorship was bad, but it was not heavily involved in drug trafficking or criminal activities, as is this one. That we know.
Yes, different times
Yeah.
in history. I mean, I didn't compare the dictatorships. I want to be clear about that.
Yeah.
I'm talking about civil society and the role of
Sure. Venezuelans try that. I mean, we have been involved in protests for the longest time. We took to the streets. There were a large number of coup attempts that took place in Venezuela that failed. So when I was saying earlier that I did not see enough muscle inside the country to lead to a change, I really believe that. It's just because a lot of things were tried that failed. And I'll leave it at that. I think we're showing time.
So we're going to do this. We'll stay here if you've got questions, because I know there's a lot more, and we want to make sure that we spend time and just answer more questions. So with that, I just want to say, and we'll come back. We'll be here, but thank you so much. Do you tell me if you want to just answer one more? But
no, I think we have people online. People online can remain online if they want. To remain in the conversation. So yeah.
So, but if you want us to just continue or just?
Yeah. If
Oh, okay. No, just I didn't know. Because I sort of saw the curtain about the music's about to start. But if not, just go ahead. Just take go ahead right there.
Yeah, a round of questions and then a round of answers.
Okay.
Close.
Yeah. Thank you. I really enjoy this conversation and all of your perspectives. There is some ideas that and literature that argue that some of the U.S. strategies are willing to reassert some of U.S. power that have been diminished, from the neoliberalism and this democracy idea that haven't been accomplished. People are disillusioned. How do you say that? Disappointed, disillusioned, disenchanted. Also, in material terms, United States has been overpassed by, for example, China in in many items, you know, in Latin America and in the world. So I think that this government kind of materialized this societal imaginary of that America was downward, you know, that they need to do American great again and all that. This kind of exceptionalism from the Destiny Manifest. So it's really interesting what is happening, but my question relies more on the new world order, right? That is maybe the rupture or the transition or whatever is happening, but U.S. is driving right to a change because they think they have been like undermined. So what do you think, like this kind of new realism in new terms that is kind of a more populist realism, do you think it will make effect on reasserting this power in the international order, or it will create maybe new conditions for China, for example, that, you know, in this situation have been some kind of parsimonious and moderate that maybe trying to find some opportunities to approach. So what do you think will be this new world order, right, shaped?
We will take one more question over there and then the answers, and we will close.
The gentleman that I wanted to ask, he left the room, but maybe someone could answer. It's a quick question.
Much quicker than the other. My question is there any evidence that Trump consulted with any of the oil company executives?
He was coming back. He's going to come back.
Yeah, because it just seems like it was kind of like an afterthought, like on regime change, human rights, you know, hegemony, whatever. But it just seems like he was using oil as one of a precursor to get into Venezuela. But I guess I'll wait if I can.
Yeah, I'm going to read aloud one question here that may be of interest. So, looking ahead, how do you envision Venezuela's trajectory influenced by Russia, China, Cuba? What are the most critical long-term strategic challenges it faces, given China's increasing economic and political influence and Russia's continued support? How might these dynamics affect Venezuela's political process and the potential for democratic reforms?
I am going to answer that question, but sort of touching on yours. And frankly, well, answering, I'm going to make an argument. It may be right or wrong, but it's up to you to. And what we're seeing here is that Venezuela, you know, what the United States did in Venezuela on January 3rd, you know, only received, he mentioned about the international community, a very tepid reaction, you know, lukewarm reaction to what happened there. The Chinese and the Russians were supposed to be competitors, the great power competitors. They actually did not do much, you know, about that. You know, of course, it is mandatory for them to protest the incursion, the violation of sovereignty, just like they've done it in other places. But it was business as usual. It was a very lukewarm approach to that. It was not a hard reaction. I remember I was a student in 1979, and when the United States and the Carter basically imposed sanctions on the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union invaded through proxies Afghanistan. That was a very strong reaction. The minute that the sanctions, the economic sanctions began to hurt more the agricultural sector in the United States, the sanctions disappear, and then there was arrangement in the global order. Okay, so what we're seeing here is that there is the Chinese are concerned about, because the Chinese is an export economy. The Chinese need, you know, a stable international monetary and economic system because they can profit from that. Okay, they don't want to isolate themselves. The Russians, the oligarchs there, they just wanted to bring more and more gold and money into their pockets because they are oligarchs, you know. So I think that what happens is a very kind of sort of a condominium, it actually reading, and I don't want to kind of sound too, it reminds me a little bit of the Congress of Vienna, the concert of Europe, okay, where the great powers after the Napoleonic wars kind of found ways to kind of coexist, that's the word that it says, rather than deter or to attack or to expand at the expense of others. They just wanted to maintain business as usual. And that's what we're seeing here. Can you believe that Mexico has helped more the Cubans than the Chinese? The Chinese, and you know how the Chinese, they laugh, they smile, but the Chinese offer $80 million in aid, one-time deal. What is $80 million for Cuba? They cannot even buy a tanker, for that. So what I'm saying is that there is sort of a accommodation between these great powers. And I fear that we are seeing a moment where these great powers are kind of resorting back to, spheres of influence rather than contending for high moral grounds. Speaking about the point that this individual, the United States was the beacon of democracy. That's the idea. Even though that they committed numerous mistakes, it invaded countries, yet there was a beacon of hope. It was a revolutionary idea of bringing democracy to the people. In this transactional administration, that is forgotten. It's gone. Okay, so I'm not sorry.
Just to answer the question online, George, thank you for moderating. Did a great job. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
For the question online, I think one of the concessions that the regime in Caracas might be willing to provide is to lessen or reduce the role, the presence, the influence of some of these external actors. That's a concession that she can give with little cost to the regime and could please or could appease Washington. China, I think, is a little different dynamic. China is exposed. They have a contract or a deal. They expect that deal to be respected. So, again, the Chinese are not going to say, ooh, Monroe Doctrine, let me pack up and leave. They're not going to do that. They're not going to do that in Panama. They're not going to do that so easily in Venezuela or anyone else in the region.
Thank you very much. So we are closing. Thank you to the moderator, Manny Garcia, our distinguished panelists, and on behalf of the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs, the Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center, our co-sponsor, the Vaclav Havel Program for Human Rights and Democracy, and the Lee Kaplan School of Journalism and Media. Thank you all for joining us today, both in person and online. Dr. Jose Miguel Cruz, thank you for being here today with us. We are grateful to our speakers, partners, audience, and for your contribution in our outstanding conversation. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.